Hi, and welcome to the 81st TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the inventor of TiddlyWiki, and today I'm joined by, from left to right on my screen, Matt. Matt, would you like to say hi, where you are, and your connection with TiddlyWiki?
Sure. So I'm Matt. Is the voice good here?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Terrific. So I'm Matt from Stockholm, Sweden. I'm a long-time Tiddly user, and I'm not a developer, but I try to participate and come up with contributions in the way I can.
Indeed. Amongst many of them, the ability to make mock-ups is one of the things that I particularly like about Matt's contributions. Thanks, Matt. I'm going to mute you because I think there's a tiny bit of... Oh, great, you've done it. A tiny bit of feedback on your line. Steve, welcome. This is Steve... Oh, well, I should ask you to introduce yourself, Steve. But how are you, Steve? Would you like to say hello, say where you're from, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
I'm Steve Kimmel. I'm from Houston, Texas. I'm an engineer. I use TiddlyWiki both in my personal stuff and in my engineering work. I've been using TiddlyWiki for, well, actually, I started off with Classic, largely because the personal, I was using a different personal wiki that basically went belly up, but this one was still obviously being under development and having support. So here I am, and it's done everything I wanted to do.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for joining us. And Steve has indeed been active on the mailing list, I think, for many years with, like Matt, a good, strong track record in making suggestions and, I think, finding bugs. We're also joined by Alex, who hasn't got a microphone, who is in Paris, has used TiddlyWiki for 6 months, and she loves it. She's a 29-year-old IT girl, and she uses TiddlyWiki for notes, knowledge base, checklists, wish lists, and so on. Great to have you here, Alex. And if I miss any questions that you're asking in the sidebar, other people with microphones, do feel free to interrupt on Alex's behalf, be sure that I pay attention to what she's saying as well. Also, as usual, at this point, I'm flicking the settings so that new people who join the Hangout won't be visible until I approve them. So if I don't notice any of our friends turning up, do please alert me if you can, and I'll enable them. So today it's a longer session than usual. We've booked 3 hours for this session. It's also a bit earlier in the day, so it's broader daylight here in Oxford. And it's a Saturday, and the idea was to just see how a Saturday session went, whether it was more convenient for people and so on. So before kicking off, we've just been joined by Ed. Ed, we've only just done the introductions. Would you like to say hi and introduce yourself, say where you're from, and something about your involvement with TiddlyWiki?
Sure. Hi, my name's Ed Dixon. I'm from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and working on a student-teacher notebook using TiddlyWiki and some other technologies, and I'm really excited about it.
Great indeed. Lovely that you could join us, Ed. So today we were going to start off with Steve, who, as he said in his introduction, has been using TiddlyWiki for many years, and he's going to show us a couple of his personal TiddlyWikis. This is always a popular feature of the Hangouts because, of course, the vast majority of TiddlyWikis that people work on aren't visible on the public web. I believe that mostly they're in people's Dropboxes and on their C drives and so on. And so that makes it always fascinating to see how people are using TiddlyWiki in anger. And I think particularly people like Steve, who've been using it for many years, because you know, by now you've got feedback on the things that you decided to do all those years ago when you adopted TiddlyWiki. But Steve, over to you, and thank you very much. Do take your time and take us through the wikis that you've got to show us.
Now let's see what I can do. The screen share. Now let's see. You want me to do full screen share?
That's normally more reliable, yes.
And then let's see. Start screen share. Now it should be. I've got that. And to start.
Excellent.
Okay. Now I can't tell whether people are seeing this personal wiki or not.
Yep, we're seeing, I think, exactly what you're seeing now, your whole screen.
All right, so you see this is my start, and you can see from this routine here that I'm used. This happens to be Daniello's editable screens on this one. Let's go to the main menu to give something a feel of the sort of routine that I use it on a routine basis. And you can see I've got, this may or may not be, I'll be at Las Cruces here and not in a couple of weeks here. Yeah, I don't know if we'll have any chance to run into each other there. And I've used this as a launching point for, I consult my daily comics for things like this. Now this is the individual tabs, obviously, with inlines on that one. So that's kind of, all right, fine. Assorted notes that I keep track of here, including testing of that kind of
So can you show us on
routine.
those? Each of those is each of those a note that you kind of keep adding to. So are those categories more than?
Yeah, this is the classic menu system that you came up with here, and this happened to be one that once I figured out how to do something, rather than forget it, which I found I had to do this number quite a lot, and so it ended up being convenient to store it as a wiki. Now this is one that I just translated from an old version of TiddlyWiki today, which is why it's not particularly clean in that regard. There's nothing exceptionally exciting about that.
Can you show us the plugin tab of ControlPanel, just so we get a feel for what you've got installed?
I'm sorry?
Could you show us the plugin tab of ControlPanel, just so that we can get a feel for what you've got installed?
The plugin ControlPanel. I have very little. Let's see, that's under Advanced.
It's not actually. It's at the top right, the top level. Sorry, top level of the ControlPanel tab.
Plugin, right.
I'm so sorry.
All right, my fault. I've got Daniel. I got a lot of Daniello stuff. I like Daniello stuff. I've got his context search over here, which is this particular tab. I've got his keyboard shortcuts, which to some extent, since I've started developing that editor routine that I'm doing, I've used that a bit less, but you'll see something more of that. I have BJ's calendar plugins and Euclid's flexible width, and the match filter that allowed me to do my in-tiddler table of contents that I got so used to. Skeeve's new tiddler. I've got a bunch of this kind of stuff routine, and then it's mostly the basics from there on. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, I've evolved a lot of this stuff up here, obviously. So I ended up doing this. Becomes a everyday type thing for me. It's just since the newspaper has started arriving so late, I end up checking my comics on the screen here. Then I've got a couple of regular blogs that I go to all the time that I end up using this. Basically, this ends up being my main portal to the internet for a lot of this kind of routine.
So when you're using that iframe browsing technique, you don't, I don't know, miss the browser navigation buttons, for instance?
No. Yeah, to some extent, the browser navigation buttons still sort of work. They're not quite as good as they would be otherwise. But now when this comes up, I can then just go up here and go back, and that works quite nicely with this. So to that regard, it makes almost no difference at all.
That's very interesting.
And so my regulars that I go to all the time, and then these are other pages that I've saved, developed, whatever. Everything ever got here. And you're probably not interested in doing, well, we could go to the TiddlyWiki stuff directly, including my how to disable camel case, because I'm not a huge fan of camel case.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those. That was one that I had that I developed in part because of my family name and my family history and the folks and the fact that I'm a chemical engineer. I have about half the words I work with seem to be in my work end up being camel case words if I were to allow it to be. Then I end up having, and now there are a few of these things that I go to that don't hold up particularly well. in a iframe. So here I've got the links that go jump off to some of those, such as the groups, which should look very familiar to you all. And this stuff just seems to work quite nicely, all framed together. So like I said, for me, this is the customizable, everything that I want to go to all at one time in one place.
I notice at the moment it's on your C drive. Do you sync it anywhere else? Do you only access it from this one computer?
Generally, what I actually put it on is a flash drive that I can cart back and forth and have it at my office computer where I can make relatively few modifications to the computer and the settings and things like that, which is part of why I've never been a big fan of the bookmarklets, because I can put them on the computer here, but I can't put them on the office computer.
And you can't run Tiddly Desktop on your office computer, I assume?
No, no. That's strictly out. Yeah. I count myself ahead that I can put Firefox on the desktop. Yeah. So I've got that one. Now, I do a lot of my work using TiddlyWiki. And so here, for example, is, I assume you guys can still see this.
Yes, this is great. I can see.
This is me using it. And I'll have, and this particular one, let's go show you the add-ins I've got here, which are a little different. Again, using Daniela's keyboard shortcuts, but I'm also using Roma Hicks, getting, what are we calling this now? Getting stuff done, or getting things, whatever it is, as Ukule's match filter and things like that. But the primary ones that I'm using on this stuff is just getting stuff done, so keep track of the particular tasks that I've got, as well as allowing me some links to some of these other notes and stuff like that. Now, as opposed to the classic TiddlyWiki user, in part it's a reflection of my history on this routine. I typically live in zoom-in mode. But I also have, and this may not actually work here, but I also include in this links to the drawings that I've embedded, and because I'm not on the computer with the drawings, I don't have that coming up. And so the other thing that I find particularly useful about TiddlyWiki, in part because in this particular case this is search, let's see, she structured, he, she, it, has structured these a little differently. No, tags. I want the tags. Now this happens to be a copy of something from an email that I've got here, so I can embed the emails and the design documents and the drawings, everything within this, although I do have some links to external stuff, and then I can end up searching and finding where a particular requirement was in any of the given documents. And so a net result of all that is that the stuff is comparatively long, and it's a I find that, to me, that almost pays the price of admission right there, is to be able to put all of my documents, from design basis documents, emails, the drawings, the data specifications, all of this good stuff together in a single form, and have everything just right there, and then be able to search and find where exactly did somebody make this particular requirement. When they said, we're going to have to use more ammonia than this, I have it in one place where I can search it. I find everybody I've shown this to doing that has been particularly impressed with my ability to jump to and find these things and the source documents almost instantly.
So tell us more about the times when you've shown it to other people. Do you ever share the file in its entirety with other people? Presumably.
There's been a couple of cases. In part, the way my project, the work that we do, ends up being, we're on projects for a while, then we get moved to another project, and we get to move to another project, and whenever I leave a project, I ended up leaving a copy of the wiki with the people who follow me. And so far, and this is part of what got me, it's part of got me particularly interested in the new users, the people who weren't up to speed. So far, I haven't had anybody yet take that wiki and be able to do anything other than look things up. Yeah, do the cross-reference. Nobody has so far evolved to say, oh, this is great stuff. I need to be able to use that in this other project as well. And so I've got that. So those are two primary things we talked about. My personal wiki here, where I've got this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I just happen to pick this particular work one. I've got half a dozen others as well.
So the work wiki, this is a wiki scoped to a specific project. So when you started this project, you'd have taken one of your earlier ones, filleted the guts out, and reused it, kind of thing.
Right, right. If I can call up, let me just pull up one more so you can see the immediate similarities here. Let's do the ADM one. And you can see readily how this is very much the same thing, you know. And like I said, and this happens to be contacts on this particular project and the to-do list from their work, as well as I have some of the particular emails there on that, and the scope of work that I've got for that particular project. Now this one I happen to have in more classic format here. And you can see all this good routine that I've got here. Now this is all routine that I had, that I used that little macro to convert emails, particularly give these greater than, less than, because I found that messed up TiddlyWiki no end. In part, I think it's trying to read those as being macros. So we've got all of that. So that's basically, I do that for every project I've got as I've gone through that. So of course I've got a couple dozen of them now.
So just to check, the Firefox at work, are you able to install TiddlyFox on that as well?
Yes. Yes, I am able to install that on that one. That's interesting. I hadn't even thought of that particular one. Now I do have a portable version of Firefox on the flash drive, which I sometimes use. But in part because I also travel a good deal, I'm never sure that I can actually put any modifications on the computers that I'm dealing with. So that's part of why I end up using the portable version of that. And the portable wiki is perfect for what I'm doing. I put all this stuff in one place. So. Yeah,
so it's interesting that also I mean, from the corporate IT perspective, TiddlyFox is actually just about as potentially dangerous as Tiddly Desktop. But I can see exactly why TiddlyFox is easy to get in, because you wouldn't think of something that was a Firefox add-on as having those kinds of privileges.
Well, that's the other things I found in my particular environment. The company is particularly interested in security, so I cannot, for a fact, it always surprises me where I can get and where I cannot get. I cannot get videos at all. In part, I think that because it's such a load on the IT system. I cannot get personal emails, Yahoo Mail, Gmail, that sort of routine. I can't get to those at all. I can't get to Dropbox. I can't get to file sharing type things.
Yeah, that sort of oppressive IT environment is I think one of the places that TiddlyWiki really shines. It's useful in that situation.
Jeremy.
Hello. We should stop
Good
briefly
morning.
to say hello to Eric and Matt. So, Eric, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself in the usual way?
Well, hello. My name is Eric Schulman, and I'm the creator of Tiddly Tools and the author of Inside TiddlyWiki, and I live in Silicon Valley.
Indeed. Great to have you here, Eric.
By the way, after the intros, I just wanted to get back to the comment about restrictive environments.
Let's see if Matt can introduce himself. Hi, Matt. How are you doing?
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Would you like to say hi, introduce yourself, say where you're from, and something about your involvement with TiddlyWiki?
Certainly. My name is Matt Kenigson, and I am currently in the midst of the melting snowpocalypse in Nashville, Tennessee. It is raining outside, and it is very, very slowly melting the 2 inches or so of ice that have sheeted everything. But actually, I don't think it's quite that bad. Maybe 3/4 of an inch. In any case, I'm involved in TiddlyWiki as part of the XAPI Design Cohort 3. I am Chief Technology Officer of a company named IDS, which is involved in, among other things, educating inmates on tablets. And we've been introduced as part of this XAPI cohort to TiddlyWiki, which, as I listen to you guys talking about restrictive environments, there's all kinds of light bulbs going off. So I'm fascinated in the conversation and look forward to hearing more.
Indeed, it was great to meet you before, Matt, and the prison environment, if that's the right word, is indeed fascinating, and yeah, such a great example of one of the privileges of working in open source is getting the opportunity to learn about, and in some cases poke one's nose into sort of completely distinct areas of life, and really interesting, and to see the parallels obviously between working for a corporate with a zealous security department and being an inmate in penal servitude is worthy of a moment's reflection. Eric, you had
yes, I have two comments
as well, I think.
Okay, I have two comments. First, the term snowpocalypse struck with me. Is anything that's a apocalypse on the end of it seems like a very viral-worthy thing to mention. You got shark popple, all this apocalypse things. So I'm thinking, what about a tiddlypocalypse? Maybe that'd be a good marketing thing to have, some sort of a momentous event. But back to the restrictive environment thing, I wanted to point out that two things. First, that historically there was a time when there was a fellow who wanted to bring TiddlyWiki into an environment that was so restrictive that he couldn't bring in a USB stick. He couldn't bring in a floppy disk, couldn't bring in any kind of media at all, and it was completely isolated. But they said if you could get TiddlyWiki onto that system, then he would be able to use it and make copies of it and everything. And what he actually did was he printed out the source code for TiddlyWiki on paper, and brought it in, and typed in the entire TiddlyWiki core in the text editor in that isolated room, and then he had TiddlyWiki on that isolated system. So in terms of restrictive environments, I think that's about as restrictive as you can imagine.
Wow. Yes. That makes me think we should find which digits of pi happen to contain the TiddlyWiki source code.
There you go.
Publish that offset so that anybody can get the source code.
Or at least get a million monkeys to start banging away on keyboards and see if they can't spontaneously generate the code. Sometimes it seems like that's how it's been generated anyway.
Thank you.
But now in a more less humorous, I don't know, way about restrictive environments, the irony of a prison environment and TiddlyWiki is that TiddlyWiki is ideally suited to stealth information. Sort of keeping things out of the ownership chain of the authorities is one of the things that TiddlyWiki actually is fairly well suited to. And so I wonder if introducing TiddlyWiki to the prison population might not have a downside as well.
I'm sorry, what's the downside?
They're hiding the information from
from authorities.
They can keep all sorts of information that they don't want people to know about can be kept in TiddlyWikis because you own your information. It's yours, no one else's.
Foment, whatever that word is. Yes, that's interesting. Is that possible, Matt? Would people?
Not only possible, but probable. It's one of the things that we found in those environments, and I won't take up too much of your time, but part of our design culture, and it's an unfortunate one, but part of our design culture involves ensuring that the folks who are entrusted to watch over the information also do not have access to it or do not have authorship. So part of what we actually are looking at as a company, because we look at these folks, these learners, in a very different way than I think almost everybody else in the industry. We look at them as folks who have the potential to do great things with their lives, and people who need to have some types of tooling and some types of social interaction in order to tap and enhance those learning capabilities. However, it is a well-known fact that the majority of the people creating negative and and just bad situations that can reinforce the bad behavior that got some of the folks in there in the first place are the guards themselves and the other folks who are in support roles. So it's a very interesting environment to try to decide how to proctor.
Would it be being too? Would it be fair to say that the system, in some sense, doesn't trust the guards?
It would be not only fair but accurate. We institutionally have to build tools that don't trust the guards or the instructional assistants.
I mean, I take your points about going too far down this line, but is it a culture in which whistleblowing can happen? If there was an inmate who knew bad behaviour by a guard, is there a mechanism by which they can report that?
Oh,
sure, but culturally they don't want to, right?
Right.
Ed can probably speak to this, but
yeah, I would really like to. There's a couple of points I want to make in that. Yeah, if I have 15 years teaching in the correctional systems, so I know the systems pretty well. And one of the biggest problems we have there is that there are too many restrictions on the teacher as far as materials that they have available. And then, Eric, I'd like to know more about how it represents a threat, because just like a protected Word document, I don't see.
It's exactly like setting a password on a Word document.
Yeah, administration.
I don't have a problem with somebody saving a password-protected journal that the prison guards can't. I mean, that nobody else can read.
Right.
I think we're in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
Gosh. Very interesting topic. We should pull back to the commonalities, I think, because perhaps the interesting thing there was that in the I don't know that perhaps there's something there about multiple motivations for the kind of controls that we're talking about, and how maybe they're reciprocal as well. So maybe just as the corporation worries about its ability to observe what I do, maybe I need to worry about my ability. Yes. So I'm sorry, not making much sense, but conscious. Yes, interesting discussion. Matthias, that is to say, you had a question, I think, for Steve about his demo. Would you like to pick that up, or indeed anything else?
Yes, let me recall the question here. Can you hear me?
You were asking whether the
Yes.
wikis were only shared after the project was finished.
Yes, exactly. Is this those wikis, are they only shared after the project, or is it something that you share with them? And in case it is, then how do you share it? Since you mentioned some restrictions that you had, is it on TiddlySpot or an open server of yours, or do you email it? And in that case, how do you handle versioning, etc.?
Well, as this has evolved, as I've used this on a routine basis, it starts off with basically just me using it, and then, like I said, when I leave the project, then the project ends up being, all that material has to be retained and archived, including some of my stuff. And then I give my successor on the project, I give them the wiki. Now, as I understood, and maybe this is something that the program will evolve into later, it's not really geared for multiple people editing tiddlers at once. I don't see the command structures to do that. And maybe I've got this one wrong.
You need to use the Node.js edition for multi-user, or sorry, Node.js configuration for multi-user editing is roughly the position. I mean, there are some situations where we can support some multi-user operations with a single file, but they're a bit limited. I mean, and you'll be aware of them. It's the old file locking problems, and locking files over a network is hard. I mean, hard to do without unintended behavior.
So,
I have
Jeremy.
one more question for Stephen. The back browser button that you showed us that you can use, does that mean, because I can't tell from your screen share here, does that mean that each URL that you're showing, does that contain the full permalink, or how did that work actually?
I'm not really sure. No,
I can tell you roughly what's happening. Actually, is the browser, and I'd completely forgotten how complex browser's behavior in this regard is. But basically, when you navigate within an iframe, the browser adds a record to the history stack of the containing page, and so it's basically done so that in those situations where people, they do redirects with big iframes that cover the whole page, and it then means that within that iframe, the browser buttons work as expected. So I think it may well interact weirdly with some of the settings that TiddlyWiki has for automatically creating perma views and so on. But yes, fun area.
Okay, so then, Stephen, is all of your content in iframes, like those cartoon things, for instance?
The cartoons were all of particularly on the personal one. I've got a huge number of iframes on that. All of the individual cartoons have an individual little tiddler which is basically nothing but an iframe. And I put it in a tiddler so that I can have the menu going across the top that I punch the button, I get, Calvin and Hobbes, and I punch a different button, I get the Phantom, and then it'll pop up that. But the content itself, the content of that particular tiddler is very small, and like I said, it's almost nothing but the iframe. And I end up using Tobias's. There was something I picked up on TB5 about how to shift that so that I can get just the comic and not all of the claptrap that goes around it. Now, I do a lot of that material that doesn't reference, that are my personal notes. Those are all done standalone within tiddlers. On the work particular stuff, particularly I have things like the PDFs. I have a lot of drawings that are PDFs, and the tiddlers, the wikis would blow up. Probably I could easily set new records for maximum wiki size if I were to try to put all those in there. And so those are typically done using embedded objects. And that,
you make an explicit embed tag rather than using the canonical URI mechanism?
Yes.
Yeah. To give you more control, presumably.
It gives me that, and the plus fact, to be honest, that I know how to do. I'm not sure how to do it.
Yes, good point. That's brilliant. Steve, thank you very much. Somebody else have any other questions or thoughts for Steve? Okay, well, I was going to pick up something that, it was triggered by something that Steve said, which was Steve reminded me, I think it was you, Steve, that did the experiment with introducing TiddlyWiki to a number of people and then carefully tracking their reactions, which was one of the things that sort of reinvigorated an ongoing conversation about TiddlyWiki's audience. And in fact, I've drawn attention on previous Hangouts to a particularly interesting response that I liked from a guy called Neil Griffin on the group, which was to say that to him it looks as though well, I shouldn't try and summarize his argument, but the result of it was that there are people that TiddlyWiki appeals to with a certain type of technical brain. We should target those people and not try and pretend that it's a tool for the masses, because the things that it's good at, particularly customization, are not things that the masses are interested in. And I don't know that I've really summarized well the way that Neil expressed it, but
I recall that particular conversation. I think that's actually a fairly decent summary of it. And you had a Hangout a couple of weeks ago, I believe. I've forgotten who the gentleman was. I think his name was Stefan or something like that, who had been using it in a class. And he had over 100 people that he had trained for that. And when asked the question, if I recall the answer correctly, it was something like 10% of the people, after having had a 16-week exposure to TiddlyWiki, only about 10% ended up using TiddlyWiki for something other than that. And so, geez, I go, cripes, the stuff that I've been doing with these people, you know, trying to see if I could get them hooked and into it in a few-hour session absolutely pales compared to that. It's pretty clear to me that TiddlyWiki is, again, it's kind of a select subgroup of us. This is not going to be something we're going to end up having a great deal of success unleashing on the general public.
No, I think that's right. That's right. So we could express it as TiddlyWiki is good for people who have problems that are the shape that TiddlyWiki is good at solving. And I think the purpose of TiddlyWiki is something about organizing and maybe customizing that organization. And if you don't have the urge to organize things, I'm not sure that anything like TiddlyWiki would ever appeal.
I'd like to suggest that there's 3 big categories of usage for TiddlyWiki that I've seen. One is people who use it as their presentation mechanism to provide information to others, you know, status reports, summaries, project information, that sort of thing. And the people who then are using it in that context aren't really, they don't care what it really is. They're just trying to say, oh, I can click through and read my material, fine. They don't really need to know how TiddlyWiki works other than to simply, you know, navigate to read things and, you know, click on titles and such. Then there's the folks who are delivering TiddlyWiki applications, highly customized, not just simply using TiddlyWiki to present information, but things like in the old TiddlyWiki Classic, you had the getting things done category of sort of packaged TiddlyWiki applications that had a lot of structure and formal.
Would you put Steve's stuff in this category? Because I mean, he's essentially created a custom edition of TiddlyWiki to serve his needs.
I unfortunately came in at the very tail end of his demonstration, but I did see a lot of tables with checkboxes and sort of interactive structured data.
He's using more than half a dozen plugins in each wiki that he showed us.
Right, and for those folks, sometimes, and it was a curious effect with the getting things done, which is not exactly the same kind of interface, but sort of the same approach of sort of packaging up a bunch of interactive functionality within TiddlyWiki, doing a lot of specialized customizations to target a particular problem domain. And with the getting things done folks, it was interesting that the users of it didn't regard it as a TiddlyWiki document. They would say, I'd like to change this heading. When's the next version coming out? Can you do that? They were treating it very much as a packaged application sort of flavor, and they again were not very interested in learning about how TiddlyWiki really worked, although they might get a little bit more into it, but it was more, they still regarded it as just an application that was handed to them for them to use without, you know, sort of trying to customize. And then the third category is the one that we seem to focus on most, which is all the folks who want to use all the wonderful power of TiddlyWiki to make their own things.
Oh, what's the difference between the first and the second? I mean, sorry, the second and the third.
Well, actually, the first and the second are very similar. The first one is simply reading content and sort of using the basics, and the second is a more elaborate use of TiddlyWiki by an author to deliver it to an audience. And so like the Getting Things Done folks, they don't actually do TiddlyWiki stuff. They do Getting Things Done stuff with a packaged thing.
Okay.
It just happens to be driven by TiddlyWiki. But then the third category is the one that we seem to be most focused on, which is the folks who are trying to build things.
Okay, yeah. So I quite like that way of looking at it. And another way I was going to offer is that we've got multiple levels of users. We've got first-party users, who are the people who use TiddlyWiki to build something for a second-party user to use. And so when we use words like user, I think one of the problems, in every bloody in every field, people seem to have problems with the word users. And in the particular case of TiddlyWiki, it's that we're often not clear whether we mean the eventual end user, say, of the material that Ed is putting together, so the learner, or the user being Ed, the first-party user who's adapting TiddlyWiki to a particular use case. And yes,
this particular topic I find very fascinating, because there's two implications that I'd love to explore with you guys, since I don't know TiddlyWiki nearly as well as you do. The first implication is, and which segues to the other, is it seems to me, especially as Eric is putting it down, that there is an opportunity then for there to be the authors and designers, as he's putting them, or developers. Well, okay, so developer would actually get involved in the use of in the building of the wiki tools. But if I understand your designations, Eric.
Well, let me give you the real quick on them. Readers consume information; they don't create any; they just consume it. Authors create information, but they're not trying to customize and sort of they might be sort of just using a TiddlyWiki somebody else gave them, but they're creating content. Designers are the folks who create those TiddlyWikis for other people, and developers are the folks who get deep into the core code and make plugins and widgets and things of that sort.
And I would just add that maybe everybody who's in category 4, by definition, is also in categories 1, 2, and 3, and so on. So every author is also a reader, but not a reader isn't necessarily any of the other 3 things.
Yes, it's definitely a progression of skill set.
Right. And also using each other's work. What the reader is reading is the stuff written by authors. The way that looks is how a designer designed it. The way that it behaved is how a developer developed it, kind of thing.
Yeah, so I take Matias's comment to mean that readers might need to be expanded to readers/users, but and there is an interactive reader and a non-interactive reader, and this is really where I'm focusing my thinking, and that is around the idea that there's probably going to be a set of use cases where there's going to be you're going to want to elicit some interaction from the readers, but perhaps especially in the use cases that Ed and I have been looking at for education, there's definitely a desire and a need for interaction. So to a very limited extent, they become authors.
Yeah,
but
I absolutely take your point. It's like a spectrum, and wherever we put the divisions, I think oddly you might be able to think of plausible cases that are in the gaps in between. And that leads to the implication: do the tools lend themselves? Are they very much oriented around a theme of complete and openness, or do they lend themselves to a more hierarchical definition where you can control those interactions and you can give limited authorship privileges? Okay, so you can build. I think the key thing in this regard about TiddlyWiki, and the thing that is unlike every other wiki that I'm aware of, is that the user interface of TiddlyWiki itself is written in TiddlyWiki. So it means that TiddlyWiki, in one sense, is a demo of the type of applications you can build with what we might call the TiddlyWiki engine. So there's a kind of ball of JavaScript at the heart of the TiddlyWiki core. Wrapped around it is a bunch of templates and stuff, the same kind of wiki text as anybody else would write. And that makes the user interface of TiddlyWiki itself, the sidebar tabs and everything. So it means that you can, in a very specific sense, it means that you can always customize the TiddlyWiki user interface. There's a kind of a constraint of the things that you can do in wiki text, and there's some things at any given time that you can't yet do in wiki text, but you can always hack it. There's always little sort of HTML and JavaScript drop-throughs you can do to hack something together that works. So I think that's what's quite powerful, because it means that as we move along that spectrum, the focus of what is being built, it shifts. On the left, it's about content and maybe responses to content, like these learning records. And as you move to the right, it's actually the components of the interface itself that are being customized. But those things are on a continuum because they're all wiki text. And so I think, to me, that's a place where TiddlyWiki's architecture has exactly the same kind of smooth spectrum with lots of intermediate positions that are useful, that reflects that same spectrum that we see of users. So that's to say, another way of saying it would be that the interface that we built as part of the TiddlyWiki core, primarily, in fact, is designed to serve the needs of readers and authors. But by building that wiki text, we've also served the needs of the designers and developers, because we have something that they can reuse either to change the TiddlyWiki interface or to build something else entirely within or alongside the TiddlyWiki interface. So it's a kind of pliability, plasticity that I think is very unusual in tools. I'm a great lover of things like Excel, HyperCard, all these tools that amplify our own capabilities. But none of them have this reflective business of their own, the user interface being built in themselves. It's, other than TiddlyWiki, and it's not an uncommon idea. We see it in things like Smalltalk, obviously, was the classic example of an old school system where, made of great virtue of the fact that its interface was written in itself. So, sorry, that was a long rant, and I should catch up on all the clever things that people have been writing in the sidebar. But anybody else? Matias is saying he has a reflection on who we turn to. Would you like to pick that up, Matias?
Yes, thank you. What would you say the implications are of your summary there of that old topic? As I see it, I see a risk that there is that part of what you're trying to say is that we shouldn't really aim at what did you call it, the Facebook crowd? Is that the term you have used previously? I think it is, right?
Yes, although that sounds pejorative, and I don't mean that.
Yeah, it was a funny term still. But anyway, my point where I want to go at is that also for developers and more advanced users, they must also be attracted to TiddlyWiki to begin with.
Right. So
and for this reason,
my main point is I think we've got a history of getting worried about TiddlyWiki's mass appeal, and so focusing the copy text of tiddlywiki.com on readers / authors at the expense of saying anything interesting for designers and developers. So I think right now, to somebody whose problem is, I'd like to really easily build a custom application that I can share with my colleagues at work, I don't think what you read on tiddlywiki.com tells you that until you dredge right through it. So that's the main impact of this, and that this analysis is having on me, is who should tiddlywiki.com speak to? So it makes me think that TiddlyWiki, how we talked about this with something similar with respect to how I can generate revenue from TiddlyWiki, and I was saying that I think it would be mad to try to get revenue from the TiddlyWiki community. But to work with the TiddlyWiki community to get revenue with them, to help each other to realize the opportunities that they see, sounds like a viable plan. So it's a kind of different way of thinking about the layering. So here, I think that tiddlywiki.com should be designed to appeal to exactly the type of person that we've now identified as interested in TiddlyWiki. And they're people who, they're not technical in the sense of being necessarily JavaScript-y people, but they're technical in the sense of reading instruction manuals, being prepared to put in effort to learn a tool, and so on. I mean, we repeatedly get guests on the Hangouts who are, I would say, advanced TiddlyWiki users, but without being technical in that JavaScripty sense. Sorry,
but so you're talking about TiddlyWiki.com. You're not actually talking about the TiddlyWiki user interface. Is that right?
No, not really about the TiddlyWiki user interface, although there may be conclusions for that would follow. But no, almost all of this, for me, the existential doubt is about what TiddlyWiki.com says. And, you know, as we've fluctuated between nice, fluffy, friendly language, and occasionally we've had quite cranky Jeremy language that talks about quines and things. And, you know, some of the time I get the impression that it is the latter that has actually brought people in. So old TiddlyWiki.com used to have, for TiddlyWiki Classic, used to have a download button with this tremendous joke that when you clicked on it, it said, haha, you've already downloaded it because the whole thing's in your browser. And you know, that's just me being very, very childish, really. But got great feedback for that joke. I think people really loved it, and it gave them a hook, you know, for exactly the type of person that we're talking about. So we're talking about, as I said, again, now that you've reminded me of what I said about Facebook crowds, it sounds pejorative, but I think we should make TiddlyWiki.com appeal to somebody who watches TED Talks, you know, somebody who's interested in the world, and you know, not be afraid to describe to them fairly what TiddlyWiki is, what the exchange that it offers. You know, it's its own complex world that requires some learning, but there's a measured route you can take through it, and once you're through it, you can create things like this and this and this. And as we were discussing on the mailing list today, a showcase is a preeminent way to show people what, you know, the diversity of what a product like TiddlyWiki is capable of.
I know that in a previous very recent Hangout, there were discussions if TiddlyWiki.com could have multiple faces for different users. What was the conclusion in that, actually? I mean,
my conclusion is that what I would like to do is to make it so that TiddlyWiki.com, when you first go there, is a Pinterest-like portal. So that's to say, box window with lots of little kind of tombstones that all connect together, and they're different colors, illustrations, and so on. And they would say things like, watch a video to get started, go here to see GitHub, go here to see the community. So there'd be pointers elsewhere, and they would allow us, hopefully, to deliver. I mean, sometimes people go to TiddlyWiki.com to get the latest version of a plugin and stuff. You know, you go there to get something, to self-service something, so we can make sure that we surface those links for the things that regular users wish to see, and that we have nice prominent links for really a separate journey for total beginners. So I think that it makes sense to have as I say, for the main audience of the main documentation to be gearing towards this more technical person. But I still think we should have a big yellow TiddlyWiki for Dummies button that does make an attempt to help people who want to go down that path. But we just don't make that the primary path that we present.
Okay.
But I was going to show you something actually that's relevant to this. So, given all the foregoing, as Matt asked, you know, great question about what's the consequence of it, and obviously for me, I gave that answer about the consequences in terms of the copy text on TiddlyWiki.com. But it does, obviously, the main aspect of TiddlyWiki for me is the code, and it is interesting to look at what at an impact it has on the code. And I've just added an experimental feature, which is a help panel. And I'll show it to you first, and then I'll explain why I think it's quite a good example, maybe, of a response to this point. So this is on the pre-release of TiddlyWiki.com. And the idea is that this would also be an empty.html, but it's not at the moment, and it's just on the pre-release. So there's a new help button. There's an immediate question about, you know, that's 33% more visual clutter here. I'm not 100% sure that's the best place for the help button. It does kind of blend in. Maybe it's sufficiently distinct from everything else that it should have its own position, perhaps top left or bottom right or something. But anyway, at the moment it's there. When I click it, an overlay panel appears. The overlay panel is independent of the sidebar, so I can scroll around the sidebar and scroll around.
I'm not seeing anything, Jeremy. All I'm seeing is a static picture of you.
Okay, then it's probably delayed at your end. Is anybody else seeing the screen?
I'm seeing your screen share.
Yeah, no, it'll probably catch up, Steve. It does sometimes. Its abilities to route these things around. But so bear with me. But you can you
okay,
can.
I've got it now.
Oh, great. Okay. So I click the help button, and the help panel appears. It independently scrolls. I can also close it by closing the X button. As I reduce the window size, it basically does exactly the same thing. So I mean, obviously, the idea of it being an overlay is that if you've got a wide screen, it means that you can leave the help panel open while you do stuff. If you've got a narrow screen, you wouldn't want to do that. So there's a 3 tabs, which are really just example content at the moment, but pointers to places where you can get help. A list of the existing YouTube screencasts. And obviously the attraction of those is that you can watch them whilst you're interacting with the underlying wiki. And there's also, stop that guy, and you can go full screen, obviously, because that's quite a small version of the video. And there's a cheat sheet which is lifted from work that Tobias did on tb5.tiddlyspot.com, some of which probably that's not that elegant at this width, and so we may need to adjust it. But and I'm not absolutely sure that this is the best place for this kind of cheat sheet information. It's possible that the cheat sheet should pop up in here somehow, or while you're in Tiddler edit mode. But anyway, that was the idea. So prima facie, the purpose that I gave for it was to help TiddlyWiki people. To help TiddlyWiki users as they're grappling with empty.html for the first time. But of course, like everything else, it's highly customizable. So you can create a tiddler with a special system tag, and it'll appear as a tab within that help panel. So it means that things like, for instance, the GSD application can take this help mechanism that's teaching TiddlyWiki and talking about how you save changes and stuff, and adapt it so that it is instead teaching GSD. There's an interesting thought that went through my head, because while I was doing this, I was slightly wondering, is it worth it really? The bit that was appealing about it, the motivation, was to be able to watch videos, in a fixed position whilst working on the rest of the document. But it's quite a lot of trouble to go to. And then I realised that actually the rationale isn't the payback for implementing the feature, isn't just how well it works in empty.html, but how well it works in all the custom applications built on top of TiddlyWiki as well.
Well, that was one of the 2 things that I ended up doing with my experimental editor routine, was having the preview panel be able to switch back and forth between what amounted to the user customizable cheat sheet and the preview. Because I know a lot of the folks that we have here, the more advanced users, don't use the preview basically at all. And that was cool. And so I recognize that. I would like to see, I know this is real experimental, I'd like to see you be able to drag that cheat sheet around, say cover up the right-hand panel, bring it over into the editor area, cover up the preview as usable. And then you've got a few little glitches there, obviously, need to be worked out. But, as part of it, one of the things I was thinking we were dealing with when we were talking about our spectrum of users is that when you've got that wide a spectrum of user, you have a real problem with the level of documentation that you've got. It's real easy to bury the newbie user in highly technical detail that's designed for rocket engineers as opposed to human beings on that. But I found, particularly when I was working with folks who were brand new, and I'd be kind of interested to see how the answer was with your prisoners that you're interested, is that almost nobody actually gets to the documentation. They break down at the user interface itself before they get there, and that was part of why I was doing what I was doing, trying to make the editor look and act a bit more like the word processors in most of the applications, with buttons that would accomplish some of the functions. And that's where I found the new users, this barrier to entry that I've always tended to refer to this as. It takes so much work to get to where you can do hardly anything that other than read, that it's not so much documentation or the structure of the TiddlyWiki.com, but it seems to me like it might be worth spending some time on the man-machine interface, the user interface within the program itself.
Can you give some examples of the kinds of issues that you'd be thinking of?
Well, like I said, when I go back to screen share, I can show you my editor, but then I know you've seen that one. Where instead of, for example, one of the
okay, no, the editor is a great example. I see what you mean. Yeah, I was going to say, you haven't had a chance to demo the editor mockup in a Hangout, and so if you're able to, it might be good to take a couple of minutes on this. I'd like to say a couple of things to introduce it, but would you be able to do that, Steve?
Sure.
Great. So this
Can I just add?
Yes.
Can I add one thing about the help feature?
Oh yes, please.
First of all, I really think it's a good idea. I think it will be valuable. It doesn't, it doesn't turn to the expert users among us because they don't quite need it. So, but as a non-expert user, I can say that I would really appreciate it, and I think it's really good because you could put up, instead of complex technical instructions, you could, for instance, embed a YouTube video, and you could do your own YouTube video towards the audience that you want your TiddlyWiki to turn to.
Did you not see Did you not see the YouTube videos in the demo that I gave?
I'm sorry, I have been distracted with the sidebar thing and everything, so I will...
I'll just show you quickly because I think we were thinking on exactly the same lines. So we've got a videos panel here. At the moment, it's just listing the videos that are currently on YouTube. So to your point,
excellent.
I think what's nice about this is that what we should have is probably half a dozen, 10 of these videos, making them all quite short, just picking out the key journeys that people need, and then yes, you can watch the videos whilst you're interacting with TiddlyWiki at the same time.
Jeremy, if I may, and I have a long list of feedback if you want it.
Go for it, please.
Lovingly delivered. I won't do it here in front of everyone. We can do that in person, but I will give you one bit. I found the introduction to TiddlyWiki video to be quite clever. It was quite nice, and there was a very nice meta aha moment at the end when you realize, oh wait, this was actually all a TiddlyWiki. It was all a collection of tiddlers and so on. However, having said that, I can guarantee you that your average user will not have that aha. It's too clever, and so there's a lot along the lines of things that I would recommend to you. Just having lots and lots of interaction with the world at large, and how to create a monetizable platform, where I would advise you to, in many cases, very, very specifically target audiences and different audiences. Your site is great for the audiences that Eric describes as authors and developers, or rather, not authors, designers and developers. I think for authors, a lot of the point is completely missed, and I think that it might be a rather interesting thing to target a different version of the site specifically to designers and authors.
Okay, so let's talk about how we split stuff up at the moment. So I think, so developers are served by the /dev site, and so for the line that we use at the moment is the idea that a developer is somebody who knows JavaScript and CSS, so they're somebody who kind of knows that they're a developer. They self-identify as being a developer. And we put that stuff into an entirely separate site. We've had, and that's the current split, that's the only split, so there's tiddlywiki.com and tiddlywiki.com/dev. There's a proposal to move the bare beginners stuff, so the sort of step-by-step intro stuff, not that there's even very much of that on tiddlywiki.com, to a separate edition, the introduction edition, in fact, that you were just talking about, that is used for the video. So that takes off the bottom and top, so to speak, leaving tiddlywiki.com to serve the middle. So now the designers, I think, I suspect that they're included in the developers bracket, as I've put it. But the authors, I think that's really the crux of the audience analysis. So my feeling is that the authors to whom TiddlyWiki appeals are these people who have this technical sense, and I'm so sorry that this is the third Hangout where I've been using the same inadequate word to describe what I mean. So by that I mean somebody with an aptitude and a bent for certain types of intricacy, but that doesn't actually do JavaScript development or CSS development. And so putting it like that, so that's more that's firmly saying that I think we should be targeting authors, and I think we should be targeting authors as if they're smart, bright people who know what they're interested in and know what their problems are, and they watch TED Talks and all that stuff. So not still trying to draw a distinction that leaves out the sort of the rank beginners who don't have a use case for which TiddlyWiki is a good answer. And so I'm not sure, Matt, if that's exactly the same, but the bit that sounds the same is a desire to focus on the author, because they're the people, I think they're the people who are in the whole chain. They're the people that have potentially the best and most magical experience. The people who do development on TiddlyWiki, they're just doing JavaScript development in a web environment, and to an end reader, most of TiddlyWiki's special nature is invisible. It's authors who win. They win by being able to use the stuff generated by designers and developers, and by being able to deliver stuff to their readers. So I'm reasonably convinced that that's right, that they're the people to target with the main body of the TiddlyWiki documentation.
Right, and I think your current documentation really targets designers more than the authors, and that's really where I'm drawing the distinction.
It may be that we need to analyze that line a bit more. What do you think of as designers?
Well, I'm keying off of Eric's description actually, but I'm looking at TiddlyWiki, and the very, very first thing you look at, you have that very clever video introduction, and then you say, or you can use it as a powerful Node.js application, la-di-da-di-da. And even the language of it, and I think a lot of us who are developers are tone deaf to this, but having now had lots of interaction with end users and with customers, I can tell you there is a lot of language in there that is not very accessible to someone who truly is an author and not a designer.
So this is the signpost for the Node.js guys, which is sending them off somewhere else. That's problematical. In terms of the language in front of other audiences.
Well, again, it's too clever. It's embedded, right? You want something that is very, very obvious and very in front of you. Are you a programmer? Are you an instructional designer? Not in our case, instructional designer. In your case, a designer of content who has some some JavaScript experience.
But that's not the pointer for the Node.js stuff. The Node.js stuff is for people who want to run the more powerful Node.js configuration rather than run TiddlyWiki in the browser.
But how do people know what they want in that initial presentation?
Let me just make sure that I'm getting at this. Is the problem that so there's a signpost here that's intended for a particular audience to take them off somewhere else, and is the problem that the signpost doesn't work for the people that it is intended for? In other words, that the people who are capable of running TiddlyWiki under Node.js don't see that signpost as applying to them? Or is the issue that the signpost is off-putting to the other people that it is not aimed at?
Ding, 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 the latter.
Yes.
It's scary.
So I think that's very problematical, because I'm saying that I think at the moment TiddlyWiki has this key audience of people who are susceptible to its charms, and that some of those people, I don't think, I was saying earlier, that I don't think that they can see from the initial tiddlers on tiddlywiki.com that TiddlyWiki is for them. So I think that's currently, to me, a shortcoming, is that it doesn't have the right signposts for somebody who's nothing to do with Node.js or being a developer, but somebody who wants to make stuff within TiddlyWiki, wants to use it to customize.
Okay, an example, the question of what's the difference between an author and a designer. An author might be somebody who says, I know all about, I don't know, some topic that has nothing to do with computing or anything, and they just want to write a sort of a guide to
tapas restaurants.
A guide to tapas restaurants in New York City, and it lends itself very well to the TiddlyWiki way of authoring, where you're going to create a website with a drill down and a bunch of categories and things, but they don't necessarily need to use anything other than the straight out-of-the-box TiddlyWiki functionality. They'll create tiddlers, they'll link them, they'll have tags. They might learn how to use a widget, to create a list of things, a roll-up of summaries, but they're not really interested in changing the way TiddlyWiki works. They're just interested in using it to present a whole bunch of
these are designers or authors you're talking
These
about?
are authors.
Oh, right, okay.
They're creating content, and in the sense they're designing their information, because they're choosing where to place it and how to link it and such, and what tags to use. But that's not really designing. Designing in the sense of customizing the interface to, I need to have more tools, buttons, and with icons. I want to have things on the left instead of the right.
Eric, let me just shortcut you a bit. The category you've got of designers, what is the thing that they are designing?
They are designing customizations to the interface.
Okay, look,
they're changing templates. They're styling things. They are.
Let me stop you here, because I think that there's two things going on here. We're having an interesting discussion about there's a spectrum of users, and we're trying to name the notches. To be honest, I think it's a bit distracting. I think a lot of the reasoning that we're doing at the moment, all we need to acknowledge is that there is a spectrum. At one end, there's somebody who's reading TiddlyWiki. At the other end, frankly, there's Jeremy. And then there's all the people in between. And so we've got we can agree on some names fairly unambiguously, like what a reader is and maybe what an author is. And to be honest, the distinctions down the complex end, I think we're getting tripped up on. We've already got tripped up on running under Node.js, which is a complex thing, but it's not a complex thing in the dimension of being a developer. And let's just not get sucked into that, because I think that Matt's actually raising a really important point that can be expressed, as I say, just talking about it, as a spectrum. So if we take it that that's the more technical audience, so Jeremy on the right-hand side, and that's a neophyte user on the left-hand side. So the main thing that I would kick this off by feeding back was that I want to make sure that we serve this bunch of people in the middle. So that's to say the people who are not hardcore JavaScript developers, etc., wherever you draw that line, but are making stuff within TiddlyWiki. So they are the people who are availing themselves of the main unique differentiating features that TiddlyWiki has. So, and my concern at the moment, my observation is that the TiddlyWiki documentation, which is very inconsistent and so on, it has a superficial layer at the front that tries to speak to that extreme end, that tries to speak to a casual user. And so, and the mistake that I'm saying I think we make was to think that we can interest people in TiddlyWiki who don't already self-identify as having a problem that TiddlyWiki is good at solving. So, and I think Matt's concern now is that or the concern that Matt's raising is that by providing these signposts for the people in the middle, the people who are authoring within TiddlyWiki, do we put off these people, the people for whom that's a overwhelming level of complexity? Is that a fair, if laborious, summary, Matt, of what you were trying to say?
It is, but I'd make a different distinction. I'd say that it's the information that you're trying to impart to the people I'm now calling the developers and designers that may be off-putting to the authors, which I believe is what you just said. But the reason why I'm keeping Eric's tags is because I actually find them very useful. I think
I'm not seeing the distinction between designer and developer. That seems like it's not necessary for. I mean, for the argument that I make, we only need three groups. We need people who are making stuff within TiddlyWiki. So roughly, they're using whatever TiddlyWiki features they can, and they're working in wiki text. We've got people who are working in JavaScript, so they're extending the innards of TiddlyWiki. And we've got people here who don't know wiki text. So those would be my three simplified categories. And I think they apply to your
extent Eric's description. I see them as people who sling content, people who sling interfaces, and people who sling functionality, right? So content slingers are authors, interface slingers are designers, and functionality slingers are developers.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I see it that way as well. And one of the things, like for instance,
well, can we keep to the thread of that Matt raised originally? So Matt, using that analysis, using that taxonomy, then can you just state again what the issue is then that you're raising?
The issue is that I think your primary monetization lies in catering to authors and leaving very clear signposts for developers and designers to get their own view of things.
Okay, so then I think that that the issue is about this designer category, because I'm saying, to me, that middle category of my three is authors. Those are the people that I want to reach. But the way that I was talking about them was in terms of they self-identifying as having problems that TiddlyWiki is capable of helping with. And I think we both agree that developers, JavaScript developers, they're often a separate site. They're very easy to signpost and move off. But I think where it gets tricky then is in that designer category, because to me, somebody who I would put in the author category, somebody who uses the list links widget or the table of contents macro, the list links macro or the table of contents macro to structure their content into lists, I would call them an author. But perhaps they'd be a designer by your definition.
I think so. And again,
I think there's a gray zone there. I'm struggling with this sort of like where you don't draw the lines. As you said, it's a spectrum, really. And someone can be more authory or more designery depending upon how much their emphasis is on the structure of their information rather than actually entering it. So I think an author at the simplest level is someone who has information that they wish to put into TiddlyWiki. They want to use TiddlyWiki to capture their information. And that's a basic author. And then there's people who want to say, I want to use TiddlyWiki to present my information in a particular style, with particular ability to follow links in this way, with roll-ups, with summaries, and things like that. So then that's also an author, but they tend to design ahead of time more.
Okay, I can see your distinction, but then I think that I'm not clear that TiddlyWiki's value proposition is particularly evident to authors that are in that category. So in other words, people who are putting content in TiddlyWiki but aren't doing any customization. So if they're, we're talking about, for those people, these are the people who they're using the lists that are built into the sidebar to navigate through their content. They've got a bunch of individual tiddlers, and they're not building any custom lists or anything like that.
Right, but I see this as an opportunity actually to create a marketplace, right?
Well,
because authors are going to need designers, and designers need authors. So again, I see there, and I think we're straying very, very far from the original intent. But I did want to. This is why I was offering to give this feedback privately. But Jeremy, I think there's two conversations going on. One is how do we best use TiddlyWiki, and the other is how do we help you create a TiddlyWiki experience that is of broader appeal and has greater monetization capabilities for you, and that's really the question I've been answering.
Yeah, no, indeed, and it's much appreciated feedback. And I think well, we've now got to the point where we've got quite a good analysis of where the difference is really. So I think that my concern is that the value of TiddlyWiki isn't really evident, our experience has shown, to authors who aren't also interested in moving down the spectrum to customize their experience. So to me, the people that I've seen TiddlyWiki exercise this elemental appeal that then drives them to use it for ages and so on, is because they want to be able to customize it, or that the built-in abilities to customize it are of interest to them, because obviously, particularly with TiddlyWiki 5, you can customize it a long way, I think, without being in that designery category where you're making macros. So it depends a lot where you put that line. If you say that the line of designers is people who make macros that are designed to be used by themselves and other people, then that would be one thing. But if they're really people who use the list links macro, then that just feels like that leaves us with a very narrow definition of authors that aren't getting much value out of TiddlyWiki. So Ed's saying in the sidebar, authors providing only content are best served by standard static publishing until they understand the wiki features and organizational features of TiddlyWiki. So I think that's right, but I guess maybe the as Matt was talking, the thing I realized is that TiddlyWiki, it sort of comes half customized. One way of looking at it is that those sidebars are an attempt to provide a generally useful set of initial customizations for people. And obviously, the particular sidebar tabs that we have are designed to support some of the classic wiki ways of writing, keeping track of orphans and missing tiddlers and so on. And so I guess maybe Matt's saying that that little group of people who are served by preparing content in TiddlyWiki just using those features, maybe it's bigger than I think. And actually, certainly, recently I've seen a few TiddlyWikis linked via Twitter, in fact. I might see if I can find it in the background. That was just that, somebody using TiddlyWiki as a blog, no plugins, no customizations, just a bunch of tiddlers that a visitor could navigate their way through and use the tags and so on as they wish. Well, look,
that visitor is a reader, and the person using it as a very simple vanilla blogging tool is an author. But if somebody said, hey, you know what, I want to have a whole bunch of extra customizations to make powerful blogging tools with all sorts of extra, visitor logging, whatever, forums and things, then that would become, something a designer would start to build.
Yeah, well, as you can tell, one of the things going on here is I really hate these kinds of taxonomies. I'm somebody who spent my life outside of, in the software industry, not in academia, and it sometimes feels that there is the humans are very drawn to making taxonomies and propounding them, and sometimes Jeremy, I wonder how useful a tool they are.
Oh, agreed. But it is sometimes useful because we need to have terminology to refer to different concepts, and so sometimes it's good to sort of do that. But they tend to be a bit too rigid and limiting.
Discussions, the meta discussion about where the boundaries are drawn, and if you luckily people will have the ability to play back this conversation, but I think that if you play back this conversation, what you will hear is the resounding sound of people agreeing with each other, about everything that's said in these conversations about where the notches on the spectrum should be.
Yes.
And it's, the kind of the problems that we have finding common ground around those notches just makes me think that it's not.
Well, I think the problem there is that it's not that we have a disagreement about what the concepts are, but I think that sometimes we haven't stated them with enough clarity, and so we tend to wander around them rather than actually focusing on the specific things. It's sort of the three blind men and the elephant. They all see the same thing from different points of view.
But look, the problem is that we're using words and categories that don't have a fixed, tight meaning, and unfortunately, the solution we're exploring, which is to talk through what those definitions should be, doesn't work. That these words they mean what they mean, and even our attempts to redefine them within the scope of the conversation, that doesn't really get over the problem. So I think the problem is that the units that we're trying to reason with are just a little bit too granular here, and I would be trying to seek entities that we can reason and argue about that are just slightly bigger, and so slightly fewer of them, so that there's less scope for these distracting agreements.
I think that some of the difficulty we run into. Sorry, go ahead. No, okay. I think some of the difficulty we run into is that we have sort of these scenarios of different people at different levels of skill, and that we're trying to figure out what's the best, if there is one, best sort of level of skill. When I say level of skill, it's on a spectrum. It's not sort of a either or, this or don't know this or whatever. And I think we sort of vary sometimes in what we think of as the typical TiddlyWiki user. And so when we talk about who we're targeting things for and what kind of language we use, we've been very inconsistent in picking the right target. And I think that's one of the reasons why TiddlyWiki hasn't, got the viral legs that it should, is because we're not putting out one clear, consistent message about who or what TiddlyWiki is about. Now, we know it's for many different people at many different levels, but the message is very muddled then, because there's no clear, consistent way to say that.
Well, and if I may, I find the conversation useful only from a perspective. I do agree with Jeremy that this is a spectrum, and that to a certain degree creating specific and very, very defined notches is not necessarily all that useful in and of itself. However, the way I approach it is, what's your end goal? What is the thing you're trying to accomplish? And if what you're trying to accomplish is what we call in politics, you guys may not know this, but I've been very involved in politics, but we call them activity series, right? So you try to get, and you call them engagement series. You try to figure out a set of activities that allow people to engage in the thing you want them to engage in a series of steps, in a series of logical engagement points at which they can become more and more used to the activities being performed and more interested in the outcomes of those activities. In politics, obviously, the outcome is you want eventually people to become politicians. But along the way, you want them to be volunteers, you want them to be organizers, you want them to be precinct captains, you want them to be, and so on and so forth. And I think what we're trying to describe here is a spectrum of engagement with TiddlyWiki, and how do you create the right types of information and the right types of instruction, if you will, to help people get to, I don't know what Rupal means, but to help people get to the point where they can get more and more engaged and become eventually those designers we really want them to be, and perhaps even developers. And we just, I believe in a bottom-up engagement model. You have to engage people at the basis level and allow them to self-select into higher tiers, and that's really the advice I'm trying to impart here.
That's very interesting. I mean, I think what you described, it describes very well the engagement model for open source communities. So you know, you, especially in projects that are bigger and more structured than TiddlyWiki, you see people talking in exactly that way. There's this sort of wide circle of people who are interested in the project, and then gradually concentric circles down to the people who are taking responsibility for running it. And you will see articles where people talk in very similar terms about how you draw people up that slope, how you make it so that it's the most fun and most entertaining thing for them to do at any given point on that path, is to sort of keep going further up the path. So that's an interesting echo, actually, that of course there's there's product development going on for TiddlyWiki, but there's also all those community processes as well. And part of the purpose of the documentation of the site is also to expose the community so that newcomers can see that there is one, and to provide a gathering point for the community to collaborate and work together. So yes, an extra dimension, which there always is an extra dimension, isn't it? So I was going to just draw this bit to a close just by actually repeating what I'd said at the beginning about how I would like to address this. And it was to split TiddlyWiki.com into more silos. So currently we have 2 silos, one for devs and one for everybody else. And this discussion is part of that discussion of how many silos should there be. And the only thing I can be clear about at the moment is I think there should be at least 3. So that's the dev stuff, the main stuff, and the introduction stuff. And it's entirely possible that they should be further subdivided.
I would suggest a 4th, but that requires a slight change in your business model, and I'll describe that to you in person.
Okay, Matt, that sounds interesting. You can say it here, unless it's incredibly commercially sensitive.
Well, certainly. I believe you need to consider hosting. You mentioned as one of your examples Pinterest at one point, and the whole thing about Pinterest is that they have an entire the Pinterest community is built entirely of authors. It's built entirely of folks who want to pin things, but they don't really have any interest in creating their own Pinterest.
Yes.
And I believe that if Eric jokingly said earlier in this discussion that TiddlyWiki for Dummies would be a very short book, and I think actually TiddlyWiki for Dummies would be a site, and it would be a site in which people can host their tiddlers. And that's a slight difference in model, because again, everything you're about is about go get your own and go muck with your own, right? And to a certain extent, you're not really offering a hosted service, but I think that at the very base level engagement, you may want to, because until people engage in it in that manner, they're not going to understand the power of pulling it down off of the site and then mucking about it with themselves.
Yeah, very interesting. So you're raising something that we haven't discussed for a long time, and it's that the most obvious business model for TiddlyWiki is a freemium business model, where, unlike the other freemium services, the free customers of TiddlyWiki don't cost TiddlyWiki anything. I shouldn't say TiddlyWiki, because TiddlyWiki is a non-profit foundation, so let's say Federatial, which is my company. So the good thing about Federatial's freemium model, if it did develop a hosting service, is that the free customers don't cost it anything, where free customers cost Twitter and Facebook obviously a fortune. And you're right, TiddlyWiki would be much more useful with a number of online services, including storage, but there's others as well. Things like being able to connect TiddlyWiki in an if this then that way, so that you can have tiddlers automatically created when you do a Foursquare check-in and all that kind of thing. One absolutely could imagine building those up into a hosted service, and that being something that you could charge for. And you could imagine doing a Kickstarter campaign to kick that off. Couple of points about it. So it's something I thought about obviously many times, because it is such an obvious it's such an obvious model. The first point to note, though, is that there's also an opportunity to do it at a meta level. So for the people who are developing and designing their own solutions in TiddlyWiki, we could make a hosting service that they could use for their users, if you see what I mean. So it'd be like a white labeled service. So me having created a custom TiddlyWiki, I could then create a custom URL at federatial.com or somewhere, to which people who I invite can create an instance of the wiki that I have created, and they will think of themselves as being my users of my customized wiki, if that makes sense. So again, kind of same thing as before. Even considering things like hosting services, when we overlay onto that our spectrum of users, we can see that a hosting service for an author is one thing. A hosting service for a designer might be, this slightly different white labelable thing. So yes, it's an interesting idea. It needs a bit more resource than I have on my own at the moment. So when I started TiddlyWiki 5, my deliberate strategy was that TiddlyWiki, in terms of storage, should be an over-the-top play. So the idea was that, what I wanted to explore was building something that looked and felt to an end user exactly like a hosted service, but actually used commodity hosting and storage provided by other people. So the key example being Dropbox. So I, as a TiddlyWiki user, I store my TiddlyWikis in Dropbox. We have special features in TiddlyWiki to, enable it to pick up individual files in my Dropbox and turn them into tiddlers and all that kind of thing. So those two ideas, that's been a bit of a conflict for me, and I think the idea of going in over the top of services like Dropbox is obviously partly it's a response to the to the incredible barriers to producing, to building and running a large-scale public internet service. So yeah. I think I've got three, for what it's worth, there's three things on my list at the moment. So three things that seem to be opportunities that other people are reflecting to me about TiddlyWiki. So you, Matt, the first person that's brought up hosting services recently, but thank you for that because it's been on my mind. The second is education. And I think one form of that idea is, what would it take to turn TiddlyWiki into a solvent foundation with enough funding to pursue TiddlyWiki's potential in education? And then the third option was the thing that I posted 2 or 3 weeks ago, TiddlyPip, this idea of a publishing business based around publishing to the iOS App Store. So those are the three things that are floating around. The idea of TiddlyPip, the publishing thing, pretty much got derailed by the fact that most of the feedback was in terms of education. So that made me think that that's that's the area where I'm getting a lot of very valuable feedback at the moment. And thank you, Matt, for bringing the hosted service up.
There is a logical trap with your feedback that you're getting. You need to be careful about that, in that you're getting a lot of feedback from your self-selected users who are going to be your designers and not the general public.
You'd think so. There are
groups.
One of the things that I quite like is, most of my TiddlyWiki interactions are via either GitHub or the mailing list. And particularly both of them, but particularly GitHub, have a bit of a barrier. Even the mailing list, to join the mailing list, you need to have a Google ID and goodness knows what else, and you have to be prepared to sign up for yet another thing that's going to send you email. And so it's always been clear that the people who I get to listen to in the TiddlyWiki community are a tiny fraction of the overall community. The first thing that, so you're right, that's biased, but I'm quite attracted to the idea that it's maybe a positive bias. If TiddlyWiki was a shop, all of the happy customers, the people who come in and avail themselves of what the shop has and leave again, they're invisible. They cost me nothing. They cost me no time or trouble, and I get to see, in a sense, the unhappy customers. I mean, not in the sense of they're whinging and complaining, but they're unhappy in the sense that they want it to do more, or they want to find out how to do it better, or something like that. But in fact, of course, they're really interesting for me to pay attention to in terms of improving the product. I mean, and of course, you're raising the question of one has to decide who to listen to, but that's a topic in of itself as well. Yes. So what was I trying to say? That I was going to the point that I also search for. I have in my Twitter client, so I love Twitter. I use it a bit. I have a little panel that's a TiddlyWiki search, and some of the people who show up tweeting about TiddlyWiki are obviously people that I already know from the community, but a significant fraction are new people, and it's there that I much more often see things like links to. I will try and find the example I was thinking of this week, actually, but links to individual TiddlyWikis that people have made that are nothing special, millions like them, but just show, and the use case that comes through rather consistently is people who make a virtue of not customizing it at all. So they're rightly, I think, taking the view that by using the vanilla product in the vanilla way, that they're giving themselves a little bit more stability. And okay, the thing I was looking for has fallen off the bottom of the 7-day search that Twitter gives me.
Jeremy, can I just, there is someone who's joined the group who should either say hello to everyone or maybe has no interest in being here. I don't know.
I'll leave them blocked for the moment until they give an indication in the chat window. I'm so sorry.
I think this is a troll. There was some screen sharing which had nothing to do with TiddlyWiki.
Okay, I shall eject that. That person is ejected. Thank you for your help with that. Whoa! I've done the wrong thing. So yeah, I mean, interesting topic. Anybody want to pick up any of the foregoing? Oh well, I was actually halfway through summarizing what I'm hoping to do. So, which is to increase the number of silos that we split the TiddlyWiki.com content into. Mindful of the point that Matt said that I think it's an unsolved problem to figure out where the boundaries should lie, but very open to the idea that we should reflect as many as 4 distinctions, distinct audiences that we're reaching. And that we make TiddlyWiki.com be a bunch of signposts taking people off to these siloed sites, and in fact a link to GitHub for the people who are going down the developer track.
And just a quick note, and you may have noted it in the chat as well, but both Matias and Stephen have have I think, quite rightly pointed out that that there is perhaps some feedback that you may want from your end community. And I'm curious, Matias, I haven't heard him speak much. I was curious what he had in mind when he made that comment.
Well, it's more of a general thing that I've pointed it out before, actually, that we don't really have any way of well, picking up the voice of the community in a consistent way. I think that we would benefit from having more tools for that. I'm not exactly sure on what those tools would be,
Do you mean
but
like
perhaps some
that kind of stuff?
Yeah, voting. Yeah, yeah, that could be one thing for sure. Because we don't really know. I mean, we're trying to we're really hypothesizing just now. We may well be right in everything we say, but we don't know that either. So,
No, but
yeah,
we do have some metrics that we can use, but they're not great. So, I mean, I get traffic for TiddlyWiki.com, which is what that's good for is that you can see the spikes. So you can see very clearly the points at which there's been any kind of meaningful external attention on TiddlyWiki. The daily, weekly totals actually don't change that much. They just go up a few percent steadily, pretty regularly. But that's pretty much the only metric we've got when we try this stuff out.
a thought just popped up in my head. Could there perhaps be like a plugin that one could, as an individual, apply to TiddlyWiki.com that kind of linked it to some kind of Discuss or a Google Plus system, so that one could post things from inside TiddlyWiki.com?
I think the topic you're getting into now is the Jeremy would like to replace, at the moment the community is entirely resident in Google Groups. I'd like to replace that with a TiddlyWiki native solution that's hosted on TiddlyWiki.com, so that the portal that you go to for the latest news and the latest discussion should all be TiddlyWiki.com, and it should all be tiddlers. And so it's that, again, it's a spectrum, because that's on, I mean, of all the home page improvements that I'd like to make, that's certainly where I would like to get to. And I guess, I mean, at the moment we're exploring what we can do within the technical constraints of what we've got at the moment. And
that would be like an end thing, yeah, but that's not what I mean. That's definitely part of what I am kind of talking about. But I was thinking about something more immediate, like to capture what the potential audience thinks. For instance, on TiddlyWiki.com, the people that do come there, they spend a few minutes and say, "Oh, I don't know what to make of this. I'll just leave it." You know, those guys or girls, if there was a quick chat box or a quick, like, you know, just put, or not a chat box, a message box, like, where they could add just some spontaneous comment of what they were thinking. Maybe that would contribute to us. I don't know.
So the one bit of that I really like, which is recognition that we could add community features to TiddlyWiki.com in a fairly simple way that falls short of the full-scale federation idea, and certainly having a kind of a place where people can post testimonials or comments certainly could be that. So one of the obstacles is technical, that TiddlyWiki.com is a static site at the moment. There is nowhere to store those comments. So and that's a considerable one to overcome. Moving TiddlyWiki to do something else on the server will be a big deal and will change the entire operational basis of running TiddlyWiki, how expensive it is, how much effort it is, and so on. But one part of what you were saying, Matias, was about questioning people who are leaving the site. My experience, having, you know, so I've been involved in businesses where there has been a concern about traffic, and that's one of the things that kind of crops up. As it happens, I don't know that you can do that. I feel that as a website visitor that I haven't given the website permission to engage in a dialogue with me, and although they politely pop up those survey things, I kind of feel they're
no, that'll never.
They're also they're something else that I regularly repeat with somebody else's wisdom, as is always the case, which is that, and it's in terms of requirements gathering, that if you ask people what they want, what they say bears no relation to how they will behave in the future. And that sounds like a nasty, cynical thing, but it's really not. It's not saying that people are mischievous and misleading. It's that if you ask people to speculate, then they'll speculate, and we're not, super brilliant at speculating in hypothetical situations. And equally, I think if you ask people, for those people who answer the question, "Why did you leave my party early?" I'm not always sure that the answer that's something that you can ask as a direct question. So as ever, it goes back to something we said before. What we look for is behavior that we can measure. We can measure the number of people talking about TiddlyWiki on the internet. We can measure the number of people visiting tiddlywiki.com. A bunch of things that we can measure, and we've got to try and modulate our concerns so that those measurements, the ones that are available, shed light on the things we're interested in.
Can you measure? Sorry, just a quick one. Can you measure also how many people visit a specific tiddler?
At the moment, I don't have Google Analytics set up like that, and it's something I'd forgotten about. But I did at one stage read up sufficiently on Google Analytics to see that it would be eminently straightforward to make it track time spent, well, not so much time spent on each individual tiddler, but time in between navigating two different tiddlers. And so, yes, it's an interesting idea. Part of my reason for not doing it was privacy concerns. So I run Google Analytics. I think that's fair. I'm not. It's a fairly common thing for sites, and I don't know. I mean, it may not be great, the amount of personal information that it asks people to reveal without their full knowing consent, but at least it's a common sort of established thing. But that, and particularly I work with tiddlywiki.com sometimes by going there and creating tiddlers of my own on tiddlywiki.com. I think of that as being a private activity. So if I created a tiddler on tiddlywiki.com and then navigated to it, and then it was showing up in Jeremy's Google Analytics reports, that would be not so nice.
But I think that would be a very useful thing. Provided, I'm not sure that the way that the TiddlyWiki 5 is structured, that you could actually do that. The ones where I've seen where you have they came to you from this page, google.com, or from some referencing source, and went to another page, took basically standalone HTML pages, each of which had its own link back to the Google Analytics, and it would, or whatever, and would allow that. But the way you're
I believe that
on the fly, I'm not sure that can be done.
Google Analytics has a JavaScript API, so you can log events. In fact, very similar to the Tin Can API, which you pre-register categories and so on. Then you log an event whenever you need to. So in our case, we'd log an event on maybe navigating to a tiddler and closing a tiddler. And then Google Analytics has various customizable reports where you can pull these custom event records out. So in the past, when I've been thinking about this, I mean, it's quite an interesting technical question, to make it work. And there's clearly many situations where it would be legitimate to use it, but I think just not on tiddlywiki.com itself. But I think it would be, for lots of this learning stuff, for instance, a lot of authors, what they crave more than anything is detailed engagement statistics that they can use to, as part of the feedback loop for improving their content.
Right. That was part of what I was looking at early on was, when people were giving up on the site, as often as not, they were, frustrated, confused. The last thing that we're going to do is sit there and fill in and say, I'm frustrated and confused. I haven't for what the hell's going on. I leave. I can't see that happening for the people that I was looking at.
Yes, I mean, I think nothing in this discussion has changed my belief that not everybody in the world is, what was the word I used? Susceptible to TiddlyWiki. And that I think, you know, we can, again, spectrum, and we can talk about how you categorize the people that are, but it's them that I want to reach. I think I've also had the experience that persuading somebody who's not interested in TiddlyWiki to be interested in TiddlyWiki, just why bother? I mean, it's incredibly hard and unrewarding work, and especially when there are, I believe, an enormous number of people who are susceptible. And I say that because, to me, everybody who uses Evernote, for instance, and I don't know how many users they've got, but everybody who's ever had the urge to use Evernote is kind of in our category. Anybody who's ever done, I don't know, certain types of customizations in Excel, I think, is in our category. People who've made mail handling rules in Outlook, they're in our category. Yeah. There's all over the place. There's technical activities that people do that are not the domain of developers, but they're, what's the phrase? Power users. Power users was the horrible 90s phrase. So.
What is your what are your thoughts then on how to catch these people, or how to? I mean,
I return to spectrum again. That I wonder. All I can think about is that I'm on that spectrum. So when I think about what my job is on that spectrum, it's to be, I'm shaking one end of the pole, which is creating TiddlyWiki, being the gatekeeper of tiddlywiki.com. And I think that I need the people further up the pole, further along the spectrum, to serve the other people. So, you know, the people up here, the readers, they're served not just by Jeremy, but also by all these intermediaries, the people who are designing the themes and the widgets and so on that the author is using, who's created the content for the end user. So a story that's worth repeating is how the history of TiddlyWiki Classic, well, the germane part is I launched it in September 2004, September the 20th. It was very lucky that 4 days later it got attention on a blog that at the time was a big deal, high traffic blog, and it drove loads of traffic. And then I think within a couple of days, everybody in the internet shire who, you know, was susceptible to TiddlyWiki had a chance to look at it and play with it. It attracted a lot of attention, but it wasn't a practical tool at that point. But within a few months, I made it into a practical tool, and not much changed. And it wasn't until 3 months after that that GTD TiddlyWiki, which I know Eric referred to earlier, was created. So that was where somebody that we would call a developer took TiddlyWiki Classic. They changed the theming of it and the text of it and the functionality of it, so all three things, to create a custom application. And that was a runaway success because GTD was popular at the time. And as Eric said, GTD TiddlyWiki users had no awareness of the genericity of TiddlyWiki, you know, behind the specific product that they were using. And when that happened, I thought that that actually that's the best and most natural shape, and that my job with creating the TiddlyWiki core is to attract and enable the type of people who can build GTD TiddlyWikis. So that manifests itself now in the way that TiddlyWiki is organized in the following way, that TiddlyWiki 5 has this concept of editions of, so you've got plugins, which are these pluggable components that you can put into a TiddlyWiki, and an edition is a starting point for TiddlyWiki. So it's a blank TiddlyWiki with some content and plugins to get you started. And so in the GTD TiddlyWiki is in fact an example of an edition of TiddlyWiki. I mean, back then it was a customization of TiddlyWiki that, you know, he'd changed it in some ways, but now it really could be an edition. And so my idea with for people using TiddlyWiki is that some people might approach it by picking up the generic general purpose edition, what we currently know as empty.html, but the vast majority would come across TiddlyWiki entirely through one of these narrow portals. So not that we've done this bit yet, but there might be a recipes.tiddlywiki.com. When you go there, there's a summary of maybe the 2 or 3 different editions that are available for people tracking recipes. And the people who are adopting that, their feeling is, oh, I found this cool way to store recipes. And part of what that idea is suggested by is the very, although TiddlyWiki, it enjoys, and people use it for a wide variety of purposes, there are a few really big hitters that keep popping up. And so my awareness is that that's obviously general note-taking, so personal note-taking, I should say, religious study, gaming, so people doing role-playing games, people doing interactive fiction, sysadmins documenting sysadmin-y things. So that's not a complete list, but those are 5 categories of people who are very easy for me to identify. And in some cases, particularly, say, the interactive fiction folk, they're using something called Twine, which incorporates TiddlyWiki. It's not exactly an edition of TiddlyWiki, but it's kind of built on TiddlyWiki. So there again, an example of a set of users who are using TiddlyWiki in a particular niche, who've moved beyond any awareness of TiddlyWiki as a distinct thing, and they're just using an overall service or thing of which a customized TiddlyWiki is a component. So that was really cool. Matt, it'd be great to discuss further, and I accept your invitation for a private discussion. And I'm actually away for the next few days till Wednesday, but when I'm back, that would be brilliant to get together and have a chat. We've got about 45 minutes of the time that I scheduled for this, so I wondered whether there's anybody had any topics that they particularly wanted to raise or discuss, or thoughts. I'm just looking in the Q&A window. There are actually a couple of questions that have been posted. So let me address those questions, and then that gives those of you on the call, that my co-hosts, a chance to just think about things that you want to raise. So the first post is from Nicola Worthington, who, as far as I know, cropped up this week in the group with some really interesting questions about wanting a custom wiki parser rule, so that the magic notation that's used in her firm for referring to, I think, tickets in a trouble ticket system would automatically be created as links to that system. And Nicola's question is there a good place outside of TiddlyWiki to be able to find community TW5 plugins, and are there any detailed tutorials on writing your own plugins? I've noticed finding resources a little hit and miss if you don't know what to look for. So Nicola, absolutely recognize the problem that you're referring to there, and of course with TiddlyWiki's great age and the fact that there's 2 versions of it, searching for stuff on Google can be particularly frustrating when you find stuff the old version of TiddlyWiki. So there's a couple of answers. The first thing is for TiddlyWiki.com to be useful, we need as much feedback and help as possible. We've been talking here about the actual documentation within TiddlyWiki, within TiddlyWiki.com. Here, I think we're also talking about links to external resources. So, a lofty goal for TiddlyWiki is for it to be the best ultimate documentation for TiddlyWiki. I think that's going to be quite tough, but it certainly should be the best and ultimate collection of links that are useful for TiddlyWiki users. So I would beg for everybody's help, really, that there's those community resources listed on TiddlyWiki.com and everybody's helped to make sure that the right things are listed there, the most up-to-date things are listed there, is very gratefully received. But the second part of the answer, Nicola, would be to look at Tobias's wiki, so tb5.tiddlyspot.com. I'll quickly do a screen share just because then for posterity we have captured what it looks like. So Tobias has done a bunch of work on gathering and presenting what I think now must be the most complete collection of tips about TiddlyWiki. He's got tips beautifully categorized. Many of you will have seen how he's, whenever any interesting discussion crops up on the group, Tobias will immediately make an update to TB5. So right now, TB5, I think, is one of the best jumping off point sort of signpost resources. We have talked about using Tobias's TB5 content as the basis for a revised tiddlywiki.org, so a community site of TiddlyWiki resources created by people in the community, and Tobias repeatedly shows himself to be the perfect person at doing that kind of curating work. So that was part two of the answer, Nicola. The final answer about writing plugins is the documentation that's linked to tiddlywiki.com/dev. So CJ Hunt's widget cookbook, I think he called it, which is definitely linked to from tiddlywiki.com/dev, has some information. Otherwise, it's, I mean, I think we have to recognize that writing a widget in a thing like TiddlyWiki is kind of a hard development problem, because widgets they're one type of thing, but they're quite a big type of thing with lots of options. There's lots of other types of things within TiddlyWiki, and it can feel incredibly overwhelming to try and understand enough of those things in order to be able to make progress. In the specific case of widgets, the good news is that there are so many widgets built into TiddlyWiki. And so I think in terms of writing a widget, the often a helpful thing is, wait, you might on the group or here, Nicola, if you can describe a little what you're trying to create, we can point to existing core widgets that closely match your functionality. Now, in this case, I imagine it's a parser rule that you wish to that you want to come up with to do the links to your ticketing system, and not a widget, but the same comments apply. There are many parser rules already built in, and one of them is meant to serve as a good jumping off point for your work. So Nicola, I hope that's helpful answer to your question. And next question is from Nicholas Spies, who's saying, however, they should not be discouraged from using what could be a very useful tool for them. This implies documentation should serve spectrum of users. Okay, so we slightly lost the original context, but I think, because I'm not sure exactly at what point I noted that question, but I think the they is the unsophisticated casual users. So I kind of, I think Matt's comment addressed this as well. There's this engagement model means that even for casual users, you're trying to expose enough of what's interesting about moving along the spectrum to try and invite people to move along the spectrum, to make it as easy as possible for them to figure out why they would want to put in the learning effort and to do the actual learning. And final question from the Q&A. A clearinghouse of TiddlyWiki resources might be quite useful. Tobias's documents certainly may be the answer if they're complete. Yes, well, I think it's the community thing is the key thing. There's a I have a very, out of all the people in the community, I have a very tight and specific focus, on the code and on well, I hesitate to use the word leadership, but kind of keeping the show on the road. And I think being able to do a good job of tracking resources is a great example of the kind of thing that reads a community that's purposefully knitted together and taking responsibility for for doing things for the wider community. And I think we've got that. We're very lucky to have a very engaged community, and I was pointing to Tobias's work, and in fact, I think we just being a bit slow on pulling Tobias's stuff in to be tiddlywiki.org. Another question from Nicola is saying, I can't figure out how to get into the Hangout chat. Otherwise, I would indeed engage a bit more. Thank you for the info, though. I know some community links on tiddlyspot.com are 404s, and tobybeer.github is hidden deep within the depths. Yes, so Toby's done a redirect, I think, for and has now moved his stuff to github.io, and certainly it would be great to have a pull request so that TiddlyWiki users, I mean people on tiddlywiki.com, don't have to go through Tobias's pull request. I'm sorry, don't have to go through Tobias's what do you call it? Redirection. And Nicola, in terms of getting into the Hangout, I'm just going to post a URL into the chat window. So this should be
Is this particular Hangout? It appears to be centric to a broader audience than the cohort 3 folks. Is that correct?
Oh yes, this is a regular TiddlyWiki Hangout.
Right.
Oh great.
Sorry. So no, I mean I much appreciate you guys from the cohort coming along, and hopefully I was very aware that the session that you first came to, we did lots of very detailed techie stuff, and yeah, this time, well, there's two types of Hangouts. We either get caught up in endless myriad details of implementation-y stuff and how things could be, or we have these kinds of existential conversations about what should we be doing to help TiddlyWiki be more successful. And I really like them both. I may say both types of discussion are incredibly useful. I'm way behind on anything in the chat window. Is any of that? There's a really maddening thing the way it scrolls when you try and read the chat window, so I'm not even sure if Matt, I can see you raising, except that Evernote has done everything in the world to make themselves ubiquitous. It's the service side of Eric. Eric needs to create a Tiddly Tech University and certification farm. Yeah, I like that. I like that very much. That's very cool. The point about Evernote making themselves ubiquitous, I'm actually really surprised by how much different stuff how many plates I'm just about able to keep up in the app. So at the moment I'm maintaining TiddlyWiki itself, and really that's the Node.js configuration and the standalone browser configuration are fairly different. And I'm maintaining TiddlyFox and Tiddly Desktop. And as you know from previous discussions, I'm quite keen to add an iOS application to that roster as well. But even the 3 that we've got at the moment does give us surprisingly broad coverage. The fact that TiddlyFox works on PCs and on Android devices, and that Tiddly Desktop, well, obviously is only just on desktop machines, but gives you a lot more customizability than TiddlyFox. Okay, there's a lot of discussion. Okay, it may be worth. Let me see if Nicola, I'm not sure. Did you see the link that I posted on the event page? Let's have another look in the Q&A panel and see if Nicola's replied that. No. Okay, so back to where we were before then, and that was, we're now half an hour or so away from the end. Any other topics or comments or thoughts that anybody would like to either return to, or there's plenty of time in the remaining half hour to open up new topics. So over to you guys. Anything from any of you?
Jeremy,
go ahead.
well, I just had a quick question. I'm starting to develop a plugin now, starting to kind of get the ball rolling and setting up the development environment and everything. I noticed that npm link would, if I'm understanding it correctly, will set up globally the plugin to work with Node. Is that correct? In the documentation I was reading, it said that it's only really needed if I was actually developing TiddlyWiki itself. But
that's right. So normally when you do an npm install, npm installs a copy of the TiddlyWiki repo in the file system, sort of hidden off in, I can't remember now, user bin or somewhere. But anyway, in the place where npm is intended to store stuff. And then when you type the TiddlyWiki command, part of npm's magic is it routes that to the copy of the TiddlyWiki repo that it is managing. But you don't really, and as you've seen, you install it with npm-g, which makes it a global install. So you don't really, as a user, see the repository. The repository is pretty much read-only at that point, in fact. When you do an npm link, what you do is set it up so that the TiddlyWiki command is tied to the repository that you were in when you typed npm link.
Yeah, I think I would prefer that.
Well, the value of it then is if you want to be able to experiment by making modifications to the repo to change how, reconfigure TiddlyWiki or something, then it's very easy to do that if you're using npm link.
Okay. Cool,
but you can also avoid it by, you can write your batch files to explicitly reference the tiddlywiki.js file. So I mean, a lot of all of that stuff is npm being clever, a global install. About the way so you don't really, as a user, see the repository. The repository is pretty much read at that point. Hello, Nicola. I fear you've fallen foul of the very peculiar characteristic of Google Hangouts, which is that it's having the viewer window open. So I think you've got the other Hangout window open with the Q&A panel. Yeah, and if you close that, then we shouldn't get the background noise. So Nicola, hello. Are you microphoned, Nicola? Yes, you must be, because we heard. Hello, Nicola.
Hello, yes.
Hello, welcome to the Hangouts. Very good to meet you. I was delighted to see you popping up in the group, and slightly indicating you might be in the sysadmin category or somewhere close to it. Well, would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us where you're from and something about your involvement with TiddlyWiki.
Yeah, so I'm a sysadmin, currently DevOps at a content delivery network, and I've used the classic TiddlyWiki a number of years ago for just general note-taking and, like you said before, like a lot of sysadmins do. And I've just recently started using TiddlyWiki 5, so I'm just getting to figure out how to customize it a bit for my workflow.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It was great to see. It was very thought-provoking because you reminded me that this business of matching magical customer names, ticket names, and so on is a pretty common requirement. So it got me interested again in thinking about ways to do that. So ways to provide slightly more accessible extensibility, so that people in effect are adding their own parser rules, but without having to write JavaScript. I was hoping that we might be able to do it so that it could be done by people just by writing regular expressions. Not that regular expressions are significantly simpler than JavaScript, of course. But, and there was something. And of course, the other thing that's interesting is that you've gone. You're diving straight into writing a plugin. or wanting to write a plugin. Which there is a point there that I'd like to pick up. Actually, it's quite interesting. I've noticed that you're not, of course, a new user, I think, because you said you were using TiddlyWiki Classic before, so presumably you knew to some degree what you were letting yourself in for. But sometimes I'm surprised by how early in the cycle people want to undertake quite deep customizations of TiddlyWiki. So that, I'm not sure what it tells us, and I'm not sure if other people will even have recognized this, but it would be posts that we get on the mailing list that go, I've just discovered TiddlyWiki, I really love it, except it doesn't do this. And then what I'm interested in is the amount of trouble they're then prepared to go to try and work around that. So, you know, in some cases you get people kind of asking for help, essentially, and they're hoping that somebody else will do it for them. And in some cases you get people who will go to a great level of detail to write their own plugins. So an example would be several months ago, there was a guy who picked up the Node.js edition of TiddlyWiki, and his concern was that when he was creating new tiddlers in the browser, that the folder that the tiddlers were being created in on the server was essentially the fixed root folder of the wiki, and he wanted the tiddlers to be saved to subfolders according to their name, which is absolutely brilliant, perfectly good idea, I hasten to add. But the thing that really surprised me is that it's quite a big undertaking, and so it meant that the person concerned's experience of using TiddlyWiki was getting over this quite big barrier, arguably a self-imposed barrier of changing its behavior like that. But it's interesting to me because it's the opposite of conventional wisdom about the internet. When I spend time with venture capitalists and that ilk, there is a kind of view that what consumers want is applications, services that are very quick and very easy, that don't ask them to think, that allow them to do the thing that they want to do and to get out again as quickly as possible. And you'll hear a lot of kind of rhetoric like that. And that does probably fairly represent the behavior of people doing some stuff on the internet. Pinning things on Pinterest may be an example, leaving a comment on a newspaper website may be an example. But what we see, I think, repeatedly, is very, very different behavior, where people actually seem to, well, I should ask this to you as a question. Nicola, you may have a challenge writing this parser module. Do you relish that challenge, or do you dread that challenge?
The challenge itself is fine. I'm pretty much there, and I have a working version that works for me at the moment, but is very messy, and it isn't something that I imagine anyone would really pick up. But until I polish it, that is. But that brings me to another point, actually. That well, 2 points really. Number one, I have found a number of plugins dotted around through Googling from people making things just for themselves. But I think because everything that these plugins that people are writing are quite specific to their needs, and they may have struggled a bit. Once they've got it working for them, the polish doesn't happen. So there's no documentation, there's no README. Which is very frustrating, because when you do eventually find something that looks like it might do what you want it to do, you have no idea how to use it.
Yeah, and it's often old and abandoned. We've already got some plugins that were made back in 5.08, which I think was September last year or something. They may or may not be compatible with the current version, and yeah, it's tricky. I mean, we are trying to. One of the things that's coming in 5.1.8 is a proper online plugin library, so that you can, within the TiddlyWiki that you're using on your own machine, you can choose plugins from the online library, install them, save, and reload. And hopefully, as we get that mechanism polished up, there will be more reason for plugin authors who are explicitly choosing to sharing stuff to publish through that route, which will make which will make it easier to tell the plugins that are loved and those that are abandoned. I think that's the issue at the moment, is that it might be good to have lots of abandoned artifacts lying around if that helped to improve the subsequent artifacts, but the confusing thing is perhaps not being able to tell what's old and what's new.
I think one reason also is that there are some plugins for let's say a single user use, is that writing the documentation and polishing the stuff is in my opinion double the amount of time writing the plugin. And that's always the problem. So how much do you want to invest? And I think the more feedback you get from the community, the easier it is to polish it. So, for example, the stuff with TiddlyMap. I think there was a plugin worth 2 weeks of work, and then the polishing goes on since 3 months or something like that. Yeah. And if you get a lot of feedback, then it's easy for the developer to improve the stuff. But if you post something and nobody's interested, then you just stop and use it. And then after 1 or 2 years, someone sees the plugin and says, "Wow, this is interesting," but there is no documentation.
I must say that Mario's given me a lot of good feedback on my editor stuff. That was been a big help.
Yes, I thought that the entire interaction around your editor was an awesome illustration of how the community should work, and frequently does. Was really cool. Speaking of which, we did raise earlier the idea of Steve quickly showing us the editor plugin. So I think I even started to signpost it to introduce it, and then we ended up getting distracted by something else. But so what the problem here is a problem that I think many people on the call have focused on at different times, which is that of all the bits of complexity in TiddlyWiki 5 as it is at the moment, the edit window or the edit template is one of the most frustrating. So there's a lot going on in a tiddler that's in edit mode. There's the visual layout of the tiddlers in edit mode is not great. There's not very good use of visual hierarchy and so on to make it easy for people to figure out what all these various bits of information are and how they relate to one another. So Matt, I think it was, wasn't it, some time ago, did some excellent mock-ups of a revision. I'm sad to say I've not touched making those improvements. That's partly because some of the things that Matt's proposing require core changes, and so an issue for Jeremy is that I will often get deflected into low-level kind of coding issues. But another step forwards was Steve recently picked up a kind of sub-challenge within the edit template, which is that the edit control for editing tiddlers itself is unfriendly. So we don't have any, there are no tools that help you remember wiki text. There are no tools to make wiki text easier to type. So what I particularly admired about Steve's approach to this problem was that describing himself as not being a developer, he decided to hack together a demonstration of what he was hoping to be able to have in TiddlyWiki. So it reminded me a little of the director of Star Wars when he was making the awful Episode 1, the ones in the 90s. He apparently made the entire first movie in the form of animatics, where he assembled existing bits of film of bits of chariot races in Ben-Hur and his son being wheeled around in a cardboard box on the kitchen floor to structurally make the shape of the movie that he wanted to make so that he could sort of see what it felt like. And what I liked about George Lucas's descriptions of that process was that it seemed really relaxed, that the animatics, as he called them, there were no rules. Anything that gave the right mood, in his case, was fine. And I think Steve's taken something of the same approach, where he's relentlessly focused on the end result, and the end result is to communicate to TiddlyWiki users how the editor could be. In private email, Steve was charmingly embarrassed about the hackiness of the JavaScript that he was using, where I was responding that actually the hackiness of the JavaScript that he was using was the sign that he really is a developer. In fact, because knowing when to hack at things with an axe is the hallmark of a developer. So with that intro, Steve, would you like to show us what you got? And as Mario said, we've had a lovely long interaction on the mailing list where Steve received lots of feedback and was then able to make numbers of stepwise improvements to the prototype.
All right, well, let's see if I can. I have this screen share mastered yet,
Yeah.
which may be easier said than done. This should say the TiddlyWiki editor workbook. Does everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, let's go straight to edit this getting started routine, and you should see a couple of things here that are spectacularly obviously different. The key one that I ended up adding, and to be honest, this was actually originally inspired by Eric's work with his Tiddly tools and his Quick Start. He has a lot of these same functions, as well as some of the routine that the snippets I've got here. And so let's just start over on this half of it, because this is part of what inspired this morning's thought here, in that what I've got here is I've inserted into the editor mode itself what I count as a online editor here, and where I have some of these things that I've developed, and these are individual little tiddlers again. These first couple of them here are ones that are my notes that I created on how to do this, and so the end user could end up adding their own topics, including some of them down here, which are in fact links to external sources that would be basically right there with the wiki itself. That was part of the routine that Tobias's, where is Tobias's markup? There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the same thing that you ended up using, because we're going off the internet here. It sometimes takes a while to get that one. That ends up being the TB5 markup routine, and part of the thought was that you could just select and copy and paste that over there as need be. So that was, as Tobias pointed out, that was almost the same, two separate thoughts from the rest of it. But here I went through the routine of where it would automatically do the stuff and have it there in the buttons that are more like what people are doing. And part of this came from this work with these new users that I was working for, and I had 3 or 4 tasks. I wanted to be able to highlight and build links, and as I analyzed that task, going back and forth between the empty and the documentation was actually quite a lot of work. So I have bold and italics and underlines, superscript, subscript. These are largely off of the keyboard snippets that he did, that Daniello did, and which Stefan did in terms of the bookmarklets and some of Tan's. In fact, some of these are in fact straight out of Tan's arrangement. But then I've also got 3 of these tools here, which are not so obvious, and these are some of the rules that I have that I've built stuff in to make some of my work a little easier here. This one takes emails which routinely don't have the extra line feeds and which have these embedded brackets for codes or macros or whatever it is that screw everything up and make it work wrong. I take up a lot of stuff from Excel spreadsheets and plunk it in here, and so this one converts a tab separated field into a table. It doesn't do a perfect job of it, but it doesn't do a bad job, as well as this one here. And so part of my thought here is we'd have a certain set of key functions that would be user selectable from this, as well as the ability to add and extend tools. And then one of the later additions that I added in here was a find and replace. Again, doing that where someone could do a search on that. And that's kind of the quick version of that. Let me see if I've got... Where is this stuff? Let's go to the test. Now here's a decent example put together of this routine. And you can see that particularly you get down to the bottom here, you've got this Excel table, which as imported, copied, and pasted, didn't work with beans. Oh, jump to help. What did I do wrong? Oh, well, they've still got... Oh, there it is. It scrolled it up to the top of the screen. All right, let's try this one again. Highlight. No, all right. So there's still some bugs I have to work through on this one. I'm doing?
You have
I've got more than one thing in edit mode. That's what's
close the upper till.
All right. There. Okay. Yeah, you can see because the letter, the email here has got this messed up, and there's some errors and this stuff there, then some of these things down below are not working right. So this is kind of a problem that I ran into on a routine basis, converting this stuff over so that it would actually work correctly and look correct. As going through there to make the task a little simpler. And there you go. Okay, now you can see that we've got the table appropriately fixed on that one. And I've got an extra wide screen, so I'm not sure if you guys can actually see this appropriately. But you can see now that I've got that done on that. I have a couple of issues, particularly if I have dual editing screens open, then stuff ends up going a bit south in that regard. But that's the heart of what I've got. And then a good chunk of part of what I ended up doing here, I've played with more recently. Where is the toolbars? There they are. Is making these tools selectable like that. So I've done some work on that, although I found that undo and redo don't work in Firefox. So you see we have these new icons there. And then I've made, I like the sticky titles, particularly in this particular version. You can see that as I compress the thing up, then I have my toolbar there as well. So it's not quite ready for general use, and part of one of my concerns on this is that these guys here are all the illegal href jumps here, and I've had problems converting those over into regular buttons. In addition, but a lot of this is, I think, a bit more like what most folks are used to seeing. And again, you can turn it whole thing off if you want. So that's what I've been working on my editor.
Really nice, really nice. Can I ask something?
Sure.
Is there? I remember in Eric's original setup or classic, he had a feature where you could split out text to be a separate tiddler and replace it with a either a slider or a transclusion or something. Is that something you're considering?
That's something I've considered. I haven't actually done anything with it, in part because I've found with this particular version, it actually is not bad to just pick stuff up and end up importing it to be a new tiddler. Now that doesn't do the full cut and everything on that one, but it doesn't work bad, so it hasn't been a real high priority of mine. It was one of the things Eric did that I happen to like quite a lot.
Yeah, one of the advantages of the split function that I had done was that not only could you highlight something to sort of say, I want that in another tiddler, but that it automatically did the appropriate thing with replacing it with syntax. So, for instance, if you wanted to take a large tiddler, which was a big block of text, and refactor it into multiple smaller tiddlers, but still have the same combined text in a presentation, it was trivial to simply select something and say split that, replace it with a tiddler transclusion, split this, replace it with a tiddler transclusion, and all you had to do is name them on the fly. So that was pretty easy. Same thing with sliders, obviously, just as a format. But the main point is that it was to facilitate refactoring of content.
And like I said, that was one of
and so
your quick editor tools. I thought were great. I used them all the time in Classic. It was one of, to some extent, going to TW5 was a step back because I lost a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. And I would echo that. I think this idea of being able to select a subset, a portion of the text in a tiddler, and then replace it with a transclusion and automatically put the selected text in the target tiddler is something that I'd really like to support in the core. That I think it's one of the answers to the debate that we haven't had for a while, which is about long tiddlers versus lots of small ones, is that the reality is there's a lot of the text that people encounter is in long tracts, and so we need to provide tools to help people split the text up into smaller chunks.
Now there was another form of splitting tiddler that I also wrote, which was somewhat different. Rather than being a interactive process of selecting and then choosing a name and what type of replacement it should be done, I had another split tiddler, which was you simply pointed at a tiddler and you say split it on all of the on a particular pattern. So, for example, if you have a tiddler containing multiple sections with headers, with the exclamation point format, you could say split it into separate tiddlers at each heading and use the heading text as the name of the tiddler.
Yeah.
That's a different way of refactoring, but it's also equally as useful as to be able to do patterned splitting rather than interactive splitting.
Yeah. So I'd just like to quickly show you, well, actually only one of the two things that I'd like to.
And while he's getting ready for that, I just want to say I'm really enjoying the fact that almost all of the things that I implemented in Tiddly Tools are now doable in the core.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, a point that I didn't raise actually, but how I often think that, well, going back to this idea that some people in my situation might try and make money out of the community, and I feel I should be paying the community because the community gives me all this amazing feedback, which makes it much easier than it would otherwise be to write a product that's used for lots of people. So yeah, aren't we so lucky to get feedback? It's an amazing amazing thing to receive. But let me just quickly show you that apropos of editing. So big tick to everything Steve's shown us, and particularly the ability to build custom refactoring tools. So you can select a block of text and it does not just turns it into a transclusion, but perhaps turns it into a transclusion and an extra tag, and does arbitrary manipulations within the editor. So really like all of that stuff, trying to automate the editing experience. However, it is instructive to turn on content editable, which is a built-in HTML setting which makes HTML content editable. So I've got content editable turned on here on this wiki, and it means that I can do things like this and start to type. And that experience, I can even even type in the middle of the button. That experience is, I think, that's our ideal. Everything we do that stops short of that direct capability to see a piece of text, to be able to edit it directly without having to think about tiddler edit modes and so on. All that other stuff, I think, is fluffy furniture that we've had to put in there. So Matt, I'll just show you more slowly how you do that, because it is quite fun. So go to.
But it doesn't save back anything. So
No. It's a useless feature. It's a good point. So if you're familiar with DevTools, Matt, go into DevTools. Find the div that's got at the top immediately under the body, and then double click on the right place. I always get very confused in Chrome where you're supposed to double click. I think here actually. Try that. Yes, there. And put content editable, all one word, in, and then it should go pink like that, I think, to indicate that it's accepted it. And now wherever I click, I can type. So, but it's back to animatics. Wow. It gives you an opportunity to sort of feel, and I think actually even things like drag and drop should just, I know, drag and drop could work.
Can you save that afterwards?
No. So it's a, I'm afraid it's kind of a mirage, because the problem is that what you're editing is the HTML representation of the tiddler, and the browser is letting you directly do that. But that doesn't affect the underlying wiki text. So in order to be able to do something like that, what we need to be able to do is to identify fragments of wiki text, for each item of text, basically in a rendered tiddler, we need to be able to track back to the source of that character in the wiki text, if there was one. And of course, that text may have been generated by a macro, so there may not be anything to edit directly. So there's lots of sort of pitfalls. But my goal is, we've talked about this before, and I think there's been some support for this idea that we should introduce an edit mode. So that's a button on a toolbar somewhere that is disengaged by default. Therefore, you only get the read-only experience. You don't get any of the buttons or widgets or confusions that get in the way when you're just reading content. When you engage it, additional user interface elements would appear, and particularly the wonderful thing would be if in edit mode you were able to just click and edit on fragments of text. And I'm reasonably, there's some intermediate things that would be nice to be able to do, to be able to edit a transclusion. So when you're in edit mode, maybe control clicking on a transcluded tiddler would open that tiddler in edit mode, ideally in place. So there's, again, it's all about a spectrum, isn't it? There's where we are at the moment, which is a very plain text editor, is basically what HTML browsers gave us for free. I think what Stephen's showing us is something that's very achievable, which is to enhance that with augmented user interface features that will, to some degree, compensate for its shortcomings. And I think the particularly interesting thing that's emerged from Stephen's experiments is the demand for these higher level operations, the things that would typically be in a bookmarklet, like the convert selected text into transclusion and so on. But then a bit further along, there's wanting to get to a world where wiki text is only exposed to those authors that are doing authoring tasks where they need to know about wiki text, and to give people the bold and italic buttons and so on that they strive for in the meantime. One final thought in this area, which I think has popped up before, is that something we've strayed into the topic of WYSIWYG editors, the beauty of Stephen's work is that it's not a WYSIWYG editor, it's a what you see is what you mean editor, you know, where you actually get to see the markup so that you can predict what it's so you can predict what it's going to do. Now, the interesting thing about WYSIWYG editors is that it's one of the common pieces of first-time feedback. So a reasonably common pattern is people coming into the group saying, I love TiddlyWiki, it seems really great, I'd really like to use it with my blah, 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 work group, church, whatever, but I can't because it doesn't have WYSIWYG editing. The thing that I particularly see is that people, they're often saying not that they have a problem with not having a WYSIWYG editor, but they're worried about another community. So in fact, again, it brings up that continuum that you got people who are here on the continuum saying, I'm fine with Wikitext, but I've got users who are along here on the continuum, they're not going to be fine with Wikitext. But one marvelous side effect of the transition from the world of Microsoft Office that we had 20 years ago to the world of the web that we have here now is actually the rise of plain text, that now the ability to select text and say, I want this to be bold, is actually the exception rather than the rule. You know, if you're using Google Docs or Medium, the other tools that are pretending to be Microsoft Word in some sense, then for sure they give you that capability. But Twitter, for instance, doesn't let you embolden things. I've no idea whether Facebook does. But my impression is that they also only support plain text posts. So, you know, what I'm saying there is that our problem, some of us at this end of the continuum, is writing complex wiki text in an editor with lots of formatting, and that makes us want all these enhanced editors. But actually, up at the other end, people filling in answers to an educational quiz or something serve perfectly well with plain text entry. And you know, in other situations, people have found that giving people the ability to have rich text can lead to inappropriate use of rich text. Okay, so now we're just at the point where I was going to close, but I think let's carry on for another 10 minutes or so. It's still nice and bright here in Oxford, and so for the last 10 minutes, let me just have a quick look here. Support from Nicola in the sidebar for the read-only mode. Matias is mentioning Luminotes, which I'm not familiar with, but has given a link to Luminotes. Oh, okay, so it's a Windows application, so I'm afraid somebody else would have to show me that. Eric is, again, talking about variants of WYSIWYG. Matias, would it be useful to show us Luminotes?
Sure, I could show it to you, but I should mention that it's an old service. I think it was some individual who tried to make a commercial application of a tool that very, very much looks like TiddlyWiki. I'm not sure it is TiddlyWiki though, but it's not supported anymore. I don't think it worked as a business idea, and he closed it a few years ago. And I just recently came to think of it and found this link to the actual software.
Okay, yeah, I've just found the site, and so no, let's not bother with the demo, but I can see the. Yes, I do remember this. I did see this at the time, and yes, I believe it.
Can you share the screen?
Yes, so sorry. Let me scroll to the top and then do so. So, well, in fact, when you go to Luminotes, it says, as Matt said, that they have shut down, but they nicely they've left their tour up, so you can see. But this presumably isn't what was ever on screen with Luminotes. I think this is just artwork.
No,
but
it's not.
Screenshots.
Actually, I found the software on my computer here, and I'll see if I can start it up.
Oh, excellent.
Yes, and in fact I just did. Let's see now how I share this with you. Which button is the screen share button?
The second one down, the green box with the white arrow.
Okay, I got a lot of. Are you sure? The green box. I got a lot of.
And then you say entire screen, and then say share.
Okay.
Yeah. That seems to have worked.
Can you see?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then, can you see this? Can you see Luminotes now?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay. So this is. Let's see now. I'm not a fluent user in this, even though it's very simple. But it's just I have to shift my mind here. So this is I just click the plus here to create a new note. There's some and I think that saved it already. Yes. And if I want it, let's see. If I do this, well, maybe it's.
You probably can't embolden the title, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So I click the formatting command before I do something. Right. So it's not like a post editing thing or post formatting. And so I can delete this tiddler. Okay. See here. I guess I can. It seems I can import and export notes. I don't know into what format. Yeah. Can I click on something? You want to see something? The nice thing is the WYSIWYG editing. Of course. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, so it's pretty smooth. Oh yeah, and now I just remember something. If I do another Tiddler equivalent, then they have this drag and drop thing, so you can.
Yeah.
So I have the second one there, the ZAGF, and I pull it up and just put it on. Well, almost.
That would be a useful feature in TiddlyWiki.
Yes, indeed. We plan to have that. I remember now. It's a Python application, isn't it?
So I'll turn off the screen share, right? If I can.
Before you do, you've got those funky tabs going on your browser. What are those? Hierarchical tabs.
Oh, here on the left side.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a Firefox plugin. It's called I think it's called Tree View or something.
Okay, so it shows you the window from which you opened each tab. There's a parent-child relationship.
Yeah, it's just tabs on the left instead of on the top. I'll see.
The hierarchy
here actually
really useful. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's a nice thing. I'll see the name of it. Just let's see here. Firefox though.
Yes.
Tree style tab.
Tree style tab. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So I think then we will draw to a close. Matt's mentioning Confluence. And yes, I'd be interested to see what Confluence looks like now. My last big corporate job, Confluence, was the standard wiki, and we did some work on integrating with it by writing a parser so that TiddlyWiki could take Confluence content offline and display it. Yes, Eric is reminding me of something I realized halfway through, which was that for Eric to have turned up at midday or whenever you turned up, it must have been 3 o'clock in the morning. And so now it's 7:10 for Eric. But Matt, yes, would you like to do that Confluence demo?
Certainly. I'll be very quick. Obviously, there's a lot in Confluence you could look at, but I'll go ahead and screen share. And goodness, I guess I'll just screen share this one. So I'll just pull up we use the Atlassian cloud version, so that being the one hosted by Atlassian, and we have all of the Atlassian tool integrations. So everybody can see this all right?
Yeah, it's going to be great.
All right. And so obviously, when we're doing this, I end up opening into the Jira dashboard. But for example, here is an example of us using the Confluence for our training modules. And in this particular case, I'll edit this front page because there's not a lot of actual content here. But as you can tell, there's, this is got some nastiness in here. So the macro is mucking up. We've done something to muck it up. That's very interesting. This is a macro down here that shows the structure of. Oh, good. That was a temporary.
Oh, good. Okay.
Good. All right. So this happens to be a macro that all it does is it takes all of the material we put into this particular space. Confluence splits out content areas into what it calls spaces, and you can set permissions on the space and do all kinds of nifty things. But the thing about Confluence is that it actually exposes a tremendous amount of functionality as plugins and macros, as well as having a significant amount of WYSIWYG editing and wiki markup. And as you can see, this has all of what you would normally expect to see in WYSIWYG type controls up here, and those get expressed inline. So all of the changes, just as you saw in the previous demo, all the changes that you make there are performed inline. It also has this interesting bit of page layouts where you can set up segmentation of the pages, and where you see all these dotted lines, this is where we've made page layout changes to this particular page. And then as you can see, the majority of this page is in this widget here, which all it does is express the page tree. And so you're able to, as you're editing, in this particular case, I'm not going to save these edits because this is a live site, but I can just begin typing there. I can do all sorts of style, pre-formatted styles that I can use. I can also insert individual wiki markup, and if I'm not remembering what my wiki markup syntax is, you can also get inline help for all of the editors and all the editor wiki markup and the auto formatting, so that you can see all of the formatting, the completions, and so on. What I actually use the markup for most is when I'm trying to do something that that is not standard formatting such as this, because all of this you can do really in a lot of the WYSIWYG tools. But what I find particularly useful is, for example, when I'm trying to put in code blocks and things like that require a slightly different treatment, and to do that, you can use these types of macros, and there's actually just there are just scads of macros available. But no, cancel that. I accidentally actually clicked the macro. But hang on, let me cancel here. I'm going to close. And let me go down to the comments area because it has a nifty. Unless you oh, let me collapse this. Oh, there we go. We've gone to the bottom. All right. So one of the nifty things is unless you disable it, all pages have by default a comment area, and they get some of the same treatment. This is all still wiki text, but there is a and I'm not finding it here. I suppose perhaps it's built into the Jira module rather than into this. there is a set of helpful bits that show you how to, for example, put in a code block. And I guess in this particular instance, inside of Confluence, they've opted to create more heavy reliance on the macros, whereas in Jira, which is not really meant to be a content authoring tool, and I'll just head over to Jira real quick. So, for example, let's just do. Oops, sorry. I promised I'd be quick, and now I'm not being quick at all. Sorry. Let me run over quickly to
the Jira instance.
Yeah, so I was trying to do a quick. I'll just go to IDS tracking. So this is I'll just go to any generic issue. There we go. We'll go to this issue right here. And in the issue itself, if I wish to comment on it, here we go. This is what I was looking for, was this box right here, where it gives you some additional text effects help section. And all of these work in Confluence as well. This is the same, all of the same wiki text annotation that works in Confluence as well. But I like the way they've got it. They've got the help lined up in Jira, because when I go to the advanced formatting, this is what I use it for most, is for being able to create blocks such as this one and such as this one, where essentially I use the code. I'm invoking the code macro and passing it some things.
That's interesting. Okay, so a couple of bits of just mapping out the territory. What you're showing us there is a wiki text editor, so it's a custom WYSIWYG editor that's capable of generating wiki text rather than HTML. What there is, and that's the thing that is quite an expensive thing to do. MediaWiki have been working on a round-trip wiki text editor for a while, and Atlassian, being a well-resourced, successful, good software company, are exactly the kind of people I'd expect to be able to do a great job there as well. But there is a bit of low-hanging fruit, which is integrating an off-the-shelf HTML editor. So BJ's done that. There's I can't now remember which of the common JavaScript editors it was that he integrated, but it means that tiddlers, yes, exactly, like TinyMCE, but it's something more modern than that, and I'll remember what it is in a minute. I think it's linked to on TiddlyWiki.com. And so what it lets you do is to edit tiddlers that are HTML tiddlers in full wiki text, sorry, in full WYSIWYG, and the only price is that you can't include any wiki text widgets within the text. So that approach is much cheaper for us because we get to reuse existing editors, and many of these WYSIWYG editors are, I mean, it would be so they're separate products. They're not going to be as well integrated as the Jira one, but there's some pretty high quality text editors out there. But it means that we divide the tiddler world up into two. Those tiddlers that are part of the user interface, that are written in wiki text that you wouldn't be able to edit with the WYSIWYG editor, and then those tiddlers that are part of the content that you would edit with the HTML editor. So that kind of hybrid approach I'm quite interested in. We shouldn't be. Wiki text exists for a reason, to solve specific problems. But HTML is still a great format for content. Does that play nicely with the thought of creating easy integration with JS tools? Yeah, I mean, some of the editors themselves are extensible. I mean, one of the challenges for us is that we already have a way that we do toolbar buttons and things like that. Each of these HTML5 WYSIWYG editors, they tend to have their own frameworks for the toolbars and so on. So it's a question of finding the right one. We need something that works well as a component inside something bigger, whereas a lot of them are designed to be dropped into a static HTML web page to kind of turn it into an application, if you see what I mean. But yeah, so there's three approaches to editing we've now talked about. There's an enhanced plain text wiki text editor like Stephen's. There's a WYSIWYG HTML editor, which we've just been talking about, and there's a full round-trip WYSIWYG wiki text editor, where you get a wiki text editor, but the underlying text you're editing is TiddlyWiki wiki text. And all three of those lend themselves to the kind of extensibility, so we can't use the word macros because they're used for something else, but shortcuts for summoning common operations, triggering common operations, that kind of thing. We should stop now, but before I draw things to a close, any final comments or thoughts from anybody? So in that case, it is for me to thank everybody very much for coming. It's great to see new visitors such as Matt and Nicola, and fabulous to welcome people who've been with us before, such as Steve. And I think I'll count Matias, Mario, and Ed as regulars. But guys, thank you very much for giving up your time. Much appreciated by me. Really interesting discussion for me, as ever. I'm the beneficiary of much good thought and contribution from other people, and I don't have to do any preparation or anything. I just turn up. So thank you, really. And the eternal topic of TiddlyWiki's audience, it's an ongoing conversation, but I think that was a very useful link in that chain. So thank you, everybody, guys. And with that, I'll wave goodbye and press the stop broadcast button. Cheers, everybody.